Chapter 1271. The current rune sword was not much different from the rune sword Su Ling had seen for the first time. The golden sword was surrounded by mysterious runes, exuding an ancient and vicissitude aura. It was powerful and powerful. Seeing Qin Chuan take out the rune sword, Su Ling asked curiously, "Aren't you worried that I will lie to you?" Qin Chuan glanced at Su Ling and said, "I asked the rune sword. He told me that you were not lying. This sword mark is indeed fatal to you." Su Ling had been sleeping for more than 10 million years, and his power had been flowing away because of this sword mark. Without this sword mark, Su Ling would never have allowed Min Luo to steal his power. However, even without the sword mark, Su Ling could no longer stop Min Luo because he was too weak now. "I didn't expect you to have been recognized by the rune sword and be able to communicate with it." Su Ling looked at Qin Chuan and said, "You are indeed the chosen one." Qin Chuan glanced at the sword mark on Su Ling's chest and asked, "What should I do?" Su Ling glanced at the rune sword in Qin Chuan's hand and said, "You just need to get the rune sword close to the sword mark. The rune sword will help me erase the sword mark." Qin Chuan raised the golden rune sword in his hand and slowly approached the sword mark on Su Ling's chest. When the rune sword approached the sword mark seemed to be attracted by something. It was peeled off from Su Ling's chest little by little and integrated into the rune sword. When the sword mark disappeared, the wound on Su Ling's chest healed in the blink of an eye. He let out a long sigh of relief and said, "It's been more than 10 million years. I haven't felt so comfortable in a long time." Su Ling had been looking forward to this day for too long. Qin Chuan looked at Su Ling, who looked a little satisfied, and asked, "How long can you live?" Su Ling replied, "Before, I might only have 3 years to live. Now, I should be able to live for 5 years. If you can kill Min Luo or severely injure Min Luo and give me a chance to take back my power, I can live a little longer." In this universe, no one would complain about living for too long, not even the ultimate existences. If there was a chance to continue living, Su Ling would not give it up. Qin Chuan looked at Su Ling and said, "I'm only an overlord at the peak of the combination realm. I'm still a long way from the tribulation realm. It's too difficult for me to fight with Min Luo." Su Ling looked at Qin Chuan meaningfully and said, "No, it's not difficult at all. You just haven't realized how amazing your potential is." Qin Chuan looked at Su Ling in confusion and asked, "What do you mean?" Su Ling was silent for a moment, and then said in a low voice, "Many people know that you was eroded by the power of the void, but few people know that you was actively eroded by the power of the void. That was his own choice." Hearing Su Ling's words, Qin Chuan couldn't help but show a look of horror on his face. He said, "How is that possible?" Qin Chuan couldn't believe it. How could you be eroded by the power of the void on his own accord? Seeing that Qin Chuan couldn't accept the truth of this matter, Su Ling sighed and said, "From your point of view, the truth of this matter may be really hard to accept, but when you know the cause and effect, you may be able to understand that ambition can never be satisfied in the pursuit of a higher level and stronger power." What the hell is going on? Qin Chuan stared at Su Ling, wanting to get an answer. Actually, back then, Su Ling looked at Qin Chuan and was about to tell Qin Chuan the truth, but he stopped after saying a few words. He slowly closed his eyes and fell asleep. Seeing this, Qin Chuan was slightly stunned. What was going on? At this moment, Galaska's figure slowly walked in from outside and said to Qin Chuan, "I just sense that the void spirits will have fallen into silence. He should have fallen asleep again." Upon hearing Galaska's explanation, Qin Chuan was stunned. Wasn't this deep sleep a little too sudden? At least tell me the truth about what happened back then before going to sleep. Qin Chuan anxiously asked Galaska, "Can you wake him up first and let him sleep later? 1 minute is enough." Galaska looked at Qin Chuan's anxious look and was a little confused. He did not know why Qin Chuan was so anxious to wake Su Ling up again, but it was not up to him to decide whether Su Ling would wake up or not. "Sorry, I can't help you with this matter. If you want to wake Su Ling up, it's up to him." At this point, Galaska paused for a moment before continuing, "But I can tell you that Su Ling didn't fall into a deep sleep on purpose." Qin Chuan smiled bitterly and said, I know Su Ling didn't do it on purpose. Originally, Su Ling's physical condition was very poor. However, after the rune sword erased the sword mark, Su Ling's physical condition improved. In order to recover as soon as possible, it was best for him to enter the state of deep sleep again and rest quietly. This was the effect of his own self-protection mechanism. Su Ling was just letting nature take its course. However, the truth of this matter was really important to Qin Chuan. Su Ling fell asleep halfway, which made Qin Chuan go crazy. Do you have something important to tell me? Galaska looked at Qin Chuan and said, maybe I can help you. Qin Chuan shook his head. If Galaska knew the truth, he would have told him the last time they met. Obviously, if he wanted to know the truth, he could only wait for Su Ling to wake up again. If Su Ling wakes up again, please contact me immediately. Qin Chuan could only hope that Su Ling could recover and wake up as soon as possible. Galaska nodded and said, I will. Qin Chuan left planet Tiger Fong, and on his way back to planet Rhea, he couldn't help but ask the rune sword, do you know what the truth is? The rune sword responded to Qin Chuan with silence. Although Qin Chuan had expected this, he still could not help but sigh. Every time he asked the rune sword about you, the rune sword always responded with silence. If there comes a day when the Imperial Guard and I meet on the battlefield, will you stand firmly by my side? This question had been in Qin Chuan's heart for a long time. This time, he could not help but ask. In response to Qin Chuan's question, the runic sword finally responded. Yes, it was a short thought and a very simple answer, but made Qin Chuan smile comfortably. Chapter 1272. When the news that Qin Chuan had become the supreme commander of the endless allied army reached the Deus cluster and reached Fro's ears, his expression couldn't help but become unsightly. Back then, when Qin Chuan had escaped from his grasp, the Demon King had fiercely reprimanded him after learning of this matter. Previously, the Demon King had warned him that if he met Qin Chuan, he shouldn't hold back and underestimate Qin Chuan. He should go all out to kill Qin Chuan. However, when he actually faced Qin Chuan, Fro had thought of going all out to kill Qin Chuan. But at that time, Qin Chuan's performance was too weak. He simply couldn't bring himself to go all out. Therefore, Qin Chuan had escaped from his grasp. It was also at that time that Fro realized that the Demon King was right. Although Qin Chuan was just an ant, he couldn't be measured by common sense. Now, the ant that had escaped from his grasp had suddenly become the supreme commander of the endless allied army, becoming an existence on equal footing with him. In Fro's eyes, this was a humiliation to him. Pass down the order, prepare to attack the Io star cloud. You can't do this. Just as Fro gave the order for the demon army to assemble and set off towards the Io star cloud, a tall figure covered in a carapace appeared in front of him and blocked his path. Fro looked at Guru, who had suddenly appeared, and said in a deep voice, "This is my living room. Shouldn't you have handed in an invitation before coming in?" Guru sat down on the sofa and smiled faintly. "We are allies. I thought that we didn't need to care about these red tape. But since you care, I'll pay attention next time." Fro coldly snorted and said, "What are you doing here? I'm here to stop you from making an irrational decision." Guru said to Fro, "Although we have occupied the Deus cluster, there is still a large number of resistance forces in the Deus cluster. We need to pacify these resistance forces and completely integrate the Deus cluster into our territory before launching an attack on the Io star cloud." Hearing Guru's words, Fro frowned slightly and didn't say anything. Guru smiled and said, "Don't worry, it'll take at most 3 months. At that time, we'll definitely satisfy your wish to attack the Io star cloud and personally kill Qin Chuan." "Did you just say we?" Fro looked at Guru and asked, "Is this also Fedric's suggestion?" Guru nodded and said, "Fedric's power. Once they're done, the Void Empires will send an army of 10 billion troops into the Deus cluster. When the time comes, we can declare war on the entire universe." Fro asked Guru, 10 billion. Guru nodded and said, "That's right, an army of 10 billion. What? Are you afraid of them?" Fro took a deep look at Guru and said, "Don't tell me you trust them completely without reservation." Although the demon race had already formed an alliance with the Void Empire, it would be a big mistake to say that Fro trusted the Void Empire because of this. From beginning to end, Fro only trusted the demon race's own people. Whether it was the Void Empire or Zerg, in Fro's eyes, they were just tools that they had to use to achieve their goals. Guru smiled and said to Fro, "Actually, you don't have to worry about this at all. Once all the resistance forces are eliminated, this universe will be divided equally between the holy race and the demon race. The Void Empire will still live on the other side of the universe and won't interfere with us. At that time, if the demon race is still dissatisfied and wants more territory, then we'll deal with them again." Hearing Guru's words, Fro coldly snorted and asked, "How long will it take for Frederick to finish inscribing the teleportation array?" 3 months, Guru replied. "Just let Qin Chuan live for another 3 months. He won't be able to cause any trouble." On the last day of the 14,590,000th year of the universe calendar, for ordinary people, this was a day to reunite with their families and welcome the new year. But for the soldiers of the Io star cloud, today was the day Qin Chuan held a morale-raising assembly. After the morale-raising assembly, a portion of them would rush to the front lines and attack the deity planet, firing the first shot to recapture the Deus cluster. 5 billion soldiers were majestically gathered on the Laius star. Qin Chuan stood on a high platform and looked around, taking in the expressions of the soldiers in front of him. In the sky, tens of thousands of huge crystal screens were hanging high, projecting Qin Chuan's heroic appearance on them, allowing the 5 billion soldiers to clearly see their commander's appearance. "Hello, everyone. I am Qin Chuan from the human race, the supreme commander of the Endless Allied Army, and one of you. Today, I have gathered everyone here for a very simple purpose. It is because I want to lead everyone on an expedition to attack the deity planet. In this battle, perhaps there will be blood, perhaps there will be sacrifices, perhaps there will be tears, but I will not let your blood flow in vain. I will not let your sacrifice lose its meaning, and I will not let those who shed tears feel pain and despair forever. I, Qin Chuan, hereby swear that as long as I am in this position, I will fight to defeat the demon race, defeat Zerg, and defeat the Void Empire. I will fight to end the war, and I will dedicate my life to the peace of the universe. If you are willing to follow me and fight for the peace of the future generations, then please shout out and let me hear your determination." Roar! As Qin Chuan's voice fell, there was a burst of passionate shouts on the Rya planet. The 5 billion soldiers were all excited, and their eyes were burning with a blazing fighting spirit. They wanted to defeat the enemy, end the war, and return peace to the universe. "Fight! Fight! Fight!" Hearing the earth-shattering shouts, the expressions on the faces of the commanders of the various forces who were watching this scene became extremely complicated. It was the first time that they had seen someone who could win the hearts of the people like this. Saint Bador sighed with emotion. "This is Qin Chuan, a young man with extraordinary influence. I'm not as good as him." If Huang Feng was a little unconvinced of Qin Chuan before, then now he was completely convinced. No one was more suitable to stand in that position than Qin Chuan. Only those who have gone through thick and thin with the soldiers, who have gone through fire and water with the soldiers, can really get the cheers of the soldiers. Tian San was deeply moved. He was very glad that Qin Chuan was on their side. It was a very lucky thing to be able to become Qin Chuan's friend, but Qin Chuan's enemies were not so lucky. Chapter 1273. At the beginning of year 14, 6 million of the universe calendar, Qin Chuan led the Endless Allied Army to Deity Star, initiating the first battle to reclaim the Deus cluster. Although the demon faction was prepared, they still suffered quite a bit in the face of the Endless Allied Army. After defending for 7 days, the Deity Star finally fell. In this battle, the Endless Allied Army obtained a complete victory, annihilating the demon faction's 200 million defenders, leaving no survivors. It was also this battle that completely established Qin Huan's leadership position in the endless allied army, his prestige rising like the sun in the sky. Just as Qin Huan had predicted, when this news spread to the Deus cluster, the resistance of the civilians seemed to have been injected with a shot of heart, erupting with great perseverance, tenaciously blocking the attacks of the demon faction's suppression forces time and time again. On the other side, the morale of the demon faction's army had suffered a great blow. The price the endless allied army paid to break through the deity star was too small. This bunch of bastards, we haven't even gone to find trouble with them, but they took the initiative to come knocking on our door. They're simply courting death. As the temporary commander of the demon faction's 2 billion reinforcements and the current adjutant of Prince Forio, Mox was unable to restrain his anger after learning about the fall of the deity star. He directly went to Prince Forio, requesting to lead the army to attack the deity star and reclaim it. In the face of the angry Mox, Forio appeared relatively calm. The current losses were not that serious and were completely within his tolerance range. Whatever the endless allied army had swallowed now, when the 10 billion troops of the Void Empire arrived, the endless allied army would spit out the same amount with interest. Therefore, Forio was not anxious at all. Looking at Forio's calm appearance, Mox was very anxious. "Your Highness, please allow me to lead the army into battle and show the glory of the demon faction." Forio glanced at Mox indifferently, saying, "The majority of the losses on the deity star were Zerg's forces. We demons only lost a small portion of our people. Even Zerg is not anxious. Why are you anxious?" Hearing Forio's words, Mox was stunned, saying, "Are we just going to do nothing? Don't be anxious. We will take action soon. Let them be arrogant for a while." Flo glanced at Mox and didn't say anything else. Right now, the fact that the Void Empire was about to send an army of 10 billion was still a secret. It wouldn't be too late to spread the news later. Deity Planet. After conquering the Sky God Planet, Qin Huan led a vanguard army of 1 billion to settle down on the Sky God Planet. They began to build defensive fortifications on the Sky God Planet, preparing to use the Sky God Planet as the front line to resist any possible counterattack from the demon faction. However, what puzzled Qin Huan was that the demon faction did not have any reaction to the Celestial Star's loss. It was as if nothing had happened. It was extremely strange. For this reason, Qin Huan sent out a large number of scouts, and even took the risk to venture deep into the Deus cluster, hoping to obtain some information. However, the Nephilim race and Zerg really did not make any moves. Not only had their forces shrunk, but even the activities of the various resistance forces in the Deus cluster had stopped. This is not right. This is not the Nephilim race's style at all. Qin Huan frowned. He had fought with the Nephilim race many times when he was on the front line. He knew very well that the Nephilim race was very proud and powerful. After the Sky God Planet fell, according to the Nephilim race's style of doing things, they should have immediately launched an attack. They would definitely not act as if nothing had happened and not react at all. Hearing Qin Huan's words, Chun Changxing thought for a moment and said to Qin Huan, "The Nephilim race and Zerg are not reacting. This is indeed illogical. They must be planning something." In the command center, all the strategists looked at Chun Changxing after hearing his words. The demon faction must be planning something, but no one could guess what it was for the time being. Qin Huan looked at Chun Changxing and asked, "What do you think?" Chun Changxing pondered for a moment and said to Qin Huan, "The demon faction is a force formed by the Nephilim race, Zerg, and the Void Empire. We are only considering the reaction of the Nephilim race and Zerg. Isn't it not thorough enough?" Hearing Chun Changxing's words, Qin Huan's eyes lit up slightly and said, "You mean to say that the Nephilim race and Zerg are waiting for the Void Empire's reaction?" Chun Changxing nodded and said, "Yes, but this is just my speculation." Qin Huan looked at the others and said to Chun Changxing, "If you have any ideas, just say it. Don't be afraid of saying the wrong thing." With Qin Huan's encouragement, Chun Changxing said, "In the previous war, it was always the Nephilim race and Zerg who contributed, while the Void Empire reaped the benefits. Now that the Deus cluster has fallen, the Nephilim race, and Zerg have done enough. Now it's time for the Void Empire to contribute." Hearing Chun Changxing's words, someone immediately raised a question, but the problem is that the Void Empire doesn't seem to have many soldiers, only about 10 million. Chun Changxing turned to look at the person who raised the question and said, "The Nephilim race can send reinforcements. Zerg can send reinforcements. Why can't the Void Empire do the same?" Qingchuan's expression changed slightly when he heard this and said, "You mean, the Void Empire is very likely to open the portal again and let more troops descend?" Chun Changxing nodded and said, "Although the demon faction is an alliance, they each have their own ulterior motives. Now that the Nephilim race and Zerg have taken down the Deus cluster, they are unwilling to contribute in the face of our attack. They are hoping that the Void Empire will send reinforcements to counterattack us so that they can reap the benefits." Chun Changxing's words caused the command center to fall into silence. Everyone was thinking about the possibility of Chun Changxing's speculation. Seeing everyone lowering their heads and pondering, Chun Changxing pondered for a moment and said, "As long as we try to send reinforcements to attack the Algo Nebula again, we will be able to come to a conclusion." Chun Changxing did not finish his words, but everyone present was smart enough to understand what Chun Changxing meant. If they attacked the Algo Nebula and were met with a strong counterattack from the demon faction, then it meant that Chun Changxing's speculation was wrong. If they could drive straight in and recapture the Algo Nebula with almost no bloodshed, then it meant that Chun Changxing's speculation was very likely to be true. The Nephilim race and Zerg were conserving their strength, waiting for the Void Empire to send reinforcements. Qingchuan looked deeply at Chun Changxing and said, "Chun Changxing, I order you to be the vanguard and lead 200 million troops to attack the Algo Nebula. Do you dare?" Chun Changxing immediately stood up and bowed to Qingchuan and said, "I dare." Chapter 1274. Universe Calendar, February 1460. Chun Changxing led a vanguard army of 200 million from the Celestial Star Strait to the Algo Nebula. In a month's time, he won consecutive battles and recovered the Algo Nebula. When Chun Changxing wanted to continue to advance into the Toluan Nebula, he was met with a very strong counterattack. Therefore, Chun Changxing had to lead his army back to the Algo Nebula. Even so, this battle could be considered a great victory. However, when this news was sent back to the Celestial Star, the higher-ups of the Alliance army were not very happy. Because the easier Chun Changxing fought this battle, the closer Chun Changxing's guess was to the truth. It was not that the Nephilim and Zerg could not stop the endless Alliance army. It was because they did not want to. In this 1 month's time, Chun Changxing led his army to attack the demon faction 11 times. In each battle, he did not encounter any decent resistance. The demon faction troops seemed to have received a hint from their superiors. They only resisted symbolically, fired 2 shots, and then retreated. It was very straightforward. Instead of calling it a war, it was more like playing house. It was simply like child's play. After that, Chun Changxing continued to attack the Toluan Nebula. He also wanted to test the demon faction's bottom line. Now, it seemed that the demon faction's bottom line was to give up the Algo Nebula. After Qingchuan learned about the situation at the front line, he gathered all the officers and soldiers in the conference hall. He looked at everyone present and found that everyone's expression was not very good. Obviously, everyone was worried about the Void Empire. Everyone, Chun Changxing almost effortlessly recovered the Algo Nebula. This is a good thing that is worth celebrating. Why do you all look so sad? Hearing Qingchuan's words, Tian Sen shook his head and smiled bitterly. He said, "Marshal Qin, Chun Changxing recovered the Algo Nebula too easily. You must know where the problem lies." Qingchuan nodded and said, "So, I gathered you here not to see you all frowning, but to brainstorm and find a solution to the problem. If you'll only know how to frown and sigh, then you can leave now." Although Qingchuan also liked to prepare for a rainy day, he did not like to start worrying and scaring himself before a crisis appeared. The Void Empire's army had not even started a counterattack, and they were already so worried. When a counterattack really came, would they still fight? Everyone's expression changed slightly when they heard Qinchuan's words. Immediately, everyone sorted out their emotions, temporarily hiding the worries in their hearts, and showed their positive side. Although Qinchuan knew that these people were only faking it, it was still better than seeing them frowning. The Nephilim race and Zur have retreated again and again, but they still refuse to retreat in the Tuluan Nebula. This shows that the Tuluan Nebula is their bottom line. Now we have to force them to lower their bottom line. Qinchuan looked at everyone and said, I want to take back as much of the Deus Cluster's territory as possible before the Void Empire's counterattack arrives. Do you have anything to say about this? Everyone could not help but look at each other when they heard Qinchuan's words. Lower the Nephilim race and Zerg's bottom line? Take back more territory? Qinchuan saw that everyone was silent. So he continued, the more territory we can take back before the Void Empire's counterattack arrives, the more tactics we can use in the future, and the more space we can pull. This is a good thing for us. Everyone nodded in agreement when they heard Qinchuan's words. Now that the Deus Cluster was riddled with holes, the Celestial Cluster situation was much better. If they could control the war within the Deus Cluster, it was indeed a good thing. Vio, the representative of the One God religion, had no objection to this. However, this was a good thing for them, but a bad thing for the demon faction. The demon faction would never let them get what they wanted so easily. After Qinchuan started the discussion, everyone immediately whispered to each other, discussing possible ways to lower the Nephilim race and Zerg's bottom line. After about 10 minutes of discussion, Tian San coughed softly, and the meeting hall quieted down. Qinchuan, I have an idea. The reason why the Nephilim race and Zerg are not retreating from the Tuluan Nebula may not be because we have touched their bottom line, but because behind the Tuluan Nebula is the Omo Nebula, the only continent. If the Tuluan Nebula falls into our hands, then we can directly threaten the Omo Nebula and the only continent, which will greatly affect their rule over the Deus Cluster. So, we could try to think of another way. Qinchuan thought for a moment, then said, You mean to change the direction of our attack and attack other nebulas? Tiansin nodded and smiled. We could try to attack the Omo Nebula, which is next to the Omo Nebula. Qinchuan looked at the others and asked, What do you think? I think Tiansan's idea is good. We can give it a try. Maybe the Nephilim race and Zerg just want to protect the hinterland of the Deus Cluster. If that's the case, then we can turn our spearhead and attack other nebulas. The Omo Nebula is a good idea. There's no harm in trying. After hearing everyone's words, Qinchuan looked at Tian San and said, I will also give you 200 million soldiers. You could try to attack the Omo Nebula. If you encounter any problems, I will ask Chen Chongqing, who is in the Omo Nebula, to support you. Hearing Qinchuan's words, Tian San immediately said, Yes, sir. After the meeting, Tian San gathered 200 million soldiers and went straight to the Omo Nebula. Qinchuan and Lu Zi walked around the base together, inspecting the various facilities and comforting the soldiers. They were very close to the people, and they really let the soldiers feel what it meant to be cared for and warm. Lu Zi looked at the faint smile on Qinchuan's face and said softly, In the past, these soldiers were just a tool for the ruler to stabilize his rule. It was you who made them realize that they are people who need to be cared for and cared for. Qinchuan smiled and said, You think too much. I'm not that great. Maybe I just haven't gotten used to my current identity. In the future, I may also become a ruthless ruler, seeing everyone as my tool. Lu Zi looked at Qinchuan and smiled. Then after the war is over, we will leave here and go to a place where there is no one to live in seclusion. That way, you won't be corrupted by power. Qinchuan looked at Lu Zi and said seriously, That day will come. Chapter 1275. Universe Calendar, Year 14. 6 million, April. Tian San led an army of 200 million to attack the Odin Nebula. After a fierce battle, they successfully broke through the defenses of 60 million Nephilim troops stationed in the Odin Nebula. They marched straight in and recovered the Odin Nebula. When Tian San tried to attack the Odin Nebula, he was met with fierce resistance and had no choice but to give up temporarily. Tian San's success made the higher-ups of the endless allied army realize that the Nephilim and Zerg were indeed unwilling to start a war with them and had been deliberately holding back. As long as they did not threaten the Odin Nebula and the only continent, the ownership of the other nebulas was negotiable. However, after conquering the Odin Nebula, Qin Xuan did not immediately send his troops to attack the other nebulas. This was because they only had 5 billion troops. Excluding the Deity Nebula and the Odin Nebula, they only had 5 billion troops that could be deployed on the battlefield. This way, occupying the Odin Nebula and the Odin Nebula was enough. If they were to occupy another nebula, their troops would be a little difficult. Therefore, the most important thing for the endless allied army now was to build fortifications in the Odin Nebula and the Odin Nebula and firmly control these two nebulas in their hands. Just as the frontline troops were nervously building fortifications, Qin Xuan once again sent a large number of scouts into the Deus cluster to gather information about the demon faction. In a war, there was nothing more important than gathering information. Galaska was originally in the Odin Nebula and did not have to participate in the war for the time being. However, because of Qin Xuan's request, Galaska led 10,000 people to the Deity Nebula early on. Galaska only brought 10,000 people with him, which was a pitiful amount for this war and would not be of much use in a direct battle. However, Qin Xuan wanted these 10,000 people, not for the direct battle, but to gather information. In order to find the people of the Void Empire, they had to rely on the Voidlings. Qin Xuan looked at Galaska, standing in front of him, and asked, "How long do you need to find the warp portal of the Void Empire?" Galaska replied, "That depends on how well the demon faction is defending this area. As long as my 10,000 men can infiltrate the heart of the Deus cluster, the movements of the Void Empire will not be hidden from them." Qin Xuan pondered for a moment and then asked, "Where do you think the Void Empire will open the portal?" Galaska replied without hesitation, "They will definitely set up the teleportation channel in a place where the void energy is denser. In other words, it will be a spacious place." Qin Xuan fell into silence. After a short while, he looked up at Galaska and said, "I thought of a place. Perhaps the Void Empire's teleportation channel is built there." After close to half a year, Prince Furio and Zerg's White Army's General Guru once again met in the Almon Nebula. The moment they met, Furio let out a cold snort and said to Guru, "The last time we met, you told me that the 10 billion troops of the Void Empire would descend in at most 3 months. What happened in the end? Over 4 months have passed, but there are still no movements from the Void Empire." Guru frowned slightly and said, "You should be questioning Fadertic instead of throwing a tantrum at me. If I could find Fadertic, I wouldn't be wasting my breath here with you." Furio let out a cold laugh. "Who knows if the Void Empire is sincere in wanting to cooperate with us? Anyway, I haven't seen any sincerity from Fadertic's performance." Hearing Furio's words, Guru threw a glance at him and said, "You weren't like this in the past. You seem to have become a chatterbox recently." In Guru's impression, Furio had always been a man of few words. No matter what he did, he would always be very cold. However, right now, it was as if Furio's mouth was equipped with a machine gun, attacking crazily. Hearing Guru's words, Furio's countenance suddenly turned grim. Of course, he knew that he had become more talkative recently. However, it was not that he wanted to do so. It was just that he really hated Qin Xuan to the core and wanted to kill Qin Xuan at all times. Right now, he was unable to do anything to Qin Xuan and was about to go crazy from holding it in. He could only vent the fury and dissatisfaction in his heart by talking too much. To put it simply, because of Qin Xuan's mental illness, Furio's cold and aloof persona had collapsed. Seeing the change in Furio's expression, Guru smiled playfully and said, "I know that you can't wait to kill Qin Xuan immediately, but there's really no need for that. He's just an ant. Why do you have to be so bothered?" In Guru's opinion, no matter how capable Qin Xuan was, he was still just an ant. If he encountered him, he could just crush him to death. There was no need to be so concerned. Seeing Guru's indifferent expression, Furio coldly said, "Do you know that Qin Chuan once escaped from the hands of the Demon King?" Guru nodded and said, "I have heard of this matter. However, it is said that the Demon Kings will had only descended on a phantom at that time. The blood that formed that phantom only came from a peak unity stage overlord. It is not surprising that Qin Chuan was able to escape." Furio took a deep look at Guru and said, "Then do you know that Qin Chuan once escaped from my hands?" Guru's expression changed slightly when he heard Furio's words. He asked, "Escape from the hands of your main body?" Furio nodded and said, "I used 60% of my strength, but I was unable to keep him." "That's impossible." Guru was shocked. Furio had already become a supreme existence at the transcending tribulation stage. Even Guru did not dare to underestimate Furio's attack when he used 60% of his strength. However, Qin Chuan was actually able to escape from Furio's hands. This was simply too inconceivable. Nothing is impossible. If he hadn't escaped from my hands before, I wouldn't be so concerned about him. However, when he thought of how Qin Chuan had triggered 2 consecutive lightning tribulations in front of him and broke through from the mid-unity stage to the peak unity stage, Furio felt that Qin Chuan was not a person who could be measured by common sense. In particular, the strength that Qin Chuan had displayed in order to block his attack was too shocking. If Qin Chuan was given more time, no one knew what heights Qin Chuan would reach. It was precisely because of this that Furio was so anxious to nip Qin Chuan in the bud. If they waited until Qin Chuan broke through to the peak unity stage, Qin Chuan would pass the immortal tribulation and advance to the transcending tribulation stage. At that time, it would not be easy for them to get rid of Qin Chuan. "I understand your concerns." Guru took a deep breath and said to Furio, "Fidetic is in the heavenly void continent. Let's go find him." Chapter 1276. When Furu and Guru arrived at the heavenly void continent and saw the densely packed soldiers of the Void Empire standing in the middle of the heavenly void continent, their expressions couldn't help but become extremely subtle. The Void Empire's army had already entered the Deus cluster through the teleportation channel, but they hadn't received any notice. At this very moment, the Void Empire's army was still pouring in from the teleportation channel above the heavenly void continent. There are at least 4 billion soldiers on the heavenly void continent. According to what Fidertic said, there are at least 6 billion more. Furu looked around vigilantly and said to Guru, "If the Void Empire wants to get rid of us, I'm afraid it'll be very difficult for us to resist." Guru shook his head and said, "They won't do that. At least not for the time being." Although Zerg and the Void Empire had formed an alliance long ago and became allies, Zerg had never truly trusted the Void Empire. Now that the Void Empire's army of 10 billion had arrived, although they were powerful, the demon race and Zerg weren't to be trifled with. Before the endless allied army was dealt with, the Void Empire wouldn't fall out with them. "We have to be on guard." Fura didn't say anything else. He would tell the Demon King the truth about today's matter. The Demon King would naturally decide what to do. Just as Furu and Guru were talking, a tall figure suddenly appeared in front of them. It was Fidertic. "My 2 friends, since you've come, why didn't you say hello to me?" Guru chuckled when he saw Fidertic suddenly appear and said, "We were just shocked by the scene in front of us. We were a little distracted for a moment and forgot to inform you." Furu sneered and didn't say anything. Fidertic didn't care about Furu's words. He slowly turned and looked at the heavenly void continent and said to Guru, "The soldiers who have arrived this time are the elites of the elites. They will definitely help us defeat the endless allied army and dominate this part of the universe." Hearing Fidertic's words, Guru smiled and said, "The situation at the front lines is tense. Please send troops as soon as possible." Fidertic nodded and said, "I've already heard about what happened at the front lines. You demons and Zerg have already paid so much. It's time for our Void Empire to pay the price. In another 2 days, the army will be fully assembled. At that time, I will lead the army to launch a general attack on the Endless Allied Army. Give me a month, and I will definitely destroy the Endless Allied Army." When he said these words, the expression on Fidertic's face was extremely domineering, as if the world was already in his grasp. Guru and Fro glanced at each other and didn't say anything. Since Fideric was confident, they would let him face the Endless Allied Army in Qinchuan. If they lost, they wouldn't lose anything. If they won, they would eat meat together. In any case, they wouldn't lose anything. At this moment, Fideric suddenly turned his head and looked towards the north. His figure flashed and appeared 1,000 miles away. He raised his hand and grabbed towards the void, pulling a figure out of the void. The person who was pulled out of the void by Fideric had a look of horror on his face, as if he didn't expect to be discovered. Fideric looked at the person with light purple skin in his hand and said in a deep voice, "A remnant of the former royal family?" Hearing Fideric's words, the expression on the person's face suddenly became angry. He wasn't a remnant, but Fideric was. Kacha! Fideric used a little force and crushed the neck of the person. Fideric knew that this void race person should be a scout of the Endless Allied Army. If this scout had appeared a month ago, then it might have caused some trouble for them. But now they had 4 billion soldiers. It was enough to make the heavenly void continent as impregnable as an iron bucket. Celestial planet. Galaska strode into the command center and said directly to Qinchuan, who was studying the situation, "You were right. They are indeed in the heavenly void continent." Hearing Galaska's words, Qinchuan immediately asked, "What did you find?" Galaska replied, "The Void Empire's warp portal is built in the heavenly void continent. Now more than 4 billion troops have arrived, and there are still more coming through the warp portal." Qinchuan's expression changed slightly when he heard this. He said, "There are already 4 billion, and it's not over yet?" Galaska nodded and said, "I estimate that the Void Empire has at least 10 billion troops this time." 10 billion. Just the Void Empire alone had 10 billion troops. If the Nephilim and Zerg were to be added, the total number of troops of the demon faction would be close to 15 billion. In the face of such a terrifying force, their 5 billion troops would not be able to hold on for long. No, we can't let them send all their troops here so easily. Qinchuan's expression was serious. He had to think of a way to stop the Void Empire. Galaska said helplessly, "In at most 3 days, the Void Empire's troops will all arrive in the heavenly void continent. We won't have the chance to do anything even if we want to. It would take at least 2 months to travel from the celestial planet to the heavenly void continent in the Omo Nebula. They would not make it even if they rushed over at their fastest speed. No, there's still a chance." Qinchuan suddenly raised his head and looked at Galaska. He said, "Ask your men to send back the coordinates of the heavenly void continent. Do it as soon as possible." Heavenly void continent. Fadertic sat on the chair that once belonged to Galaska. He looked calmly at the warp portal in the sky with a confident smile on his face. In another day, the remaining 2 billion troops would arrive in the heavenly void continent. By then, he would be able to launch an attack on the celestial cluster. As long as he defeated the Endless Allied Army, no one in this universe would be able to stop the Void Empire's troops. Fadertic knew very well that Furio and Guru did not seriously resist the Endless Allied Army's attack previously. They were deliberately holding back and waiting for the Void Empire to make a move. Fadertic was not dissatisfied with this, nor was he angry. To Fadertic, Furio and Guru were still useful. It was not appropriate for him to fall out with them for the time being. After the war ended, he would naturally make Furio and Guru pay the price. Oh, not only Furio and Guru, but also the Nephilim and Zerg. The ambition of the Void Empire was not so easily satisfied. Just as Fadertic was happily imagining the future, a huge warp portal slowly appeared in the void about 50,000 kilometers away from the heavenly void continent. 2 figures were transported out of it. They were Qinchuan and Lu Zi, who were still on the celestial planet yesterday. Chapter 1277. On the interstellar teleportation portal, Lu Zi looked in the direction of the Tianshu continent and said to Qin Xuan, "The interstellar teleportation portal can only be maintained for an hour at most. You must return within an hour." Qin Xuan nodded and said to Lu Zi, "I know. I will definitely return within an hour." This time, Qin Xuan only wanted to make an attempt. Regardless of whether he had the opportunity or not, he would return within an hour. Lu Zi's purpose in coming here was to use an illusion array to conceal the interstellar teleportation portal, so as to prevent others from discovering its existence and causing unnecessary accidents. "I'm going." Before he finished speaking, Qin Xuan used the space travel technique to leave. In the blink of an eye, he was thousands of miles away. At this time, Qin Xuan could already rely on his powerful spirit condensation stage mental power to perceive the existence of the countless Void Empire's army on the Tianshu continent. In the sky above the Tianshu continent, there was an endless stream of Void Empire's army descending from the teleportation portal. Qin Xuan's goal this time was precisely the teleportation portal. According to his previous calculations, if he could destroy the teleportation portal, he could reduce the Void Empire's army by at least 1 billion soldiers. Although the risk was great, the benefits were extremely high. Qin Xuan wasn't sure if there was a supreme existence of the Void Empire's tribulation stage on the Tianshu continent. Although he was lucky enough to escape from Furio last time, he wasn't sure if he would be so lucky every time. Therefore, he only had one chance to make a move this time. No matter whether he succeeded or not, he would leave as quickly as possible. After making up his mind, Qin Xuan opened the space portal again and used the space travel technique to advance. He didn't know how far a supreme existence's perception range was, so when he arrived at a place only 15,000 kilometers away from the Tianshu continent, Qin Xuan stopped. This was the maximum distance of the space travel technique. The next time he teleported, he would directly arrive above the Tianshu continent. "Fuck!" Qin Xuan roared and opened the space door as fast as he could. Before the space door was fully formed, Qin Xuan had already rushed in. In the blink of an eye, he appeared in the sky above the heavenly void continent, standing in front of the teleportation channel that was continuously sending troops to the heavenly void continent. When Qin Xuan's figure appeared here, there was a sudden burst of shouts around him. "Enemy attack!" Qin Xuan completely ignored the shouts around him. He raised his hand and clenched it in the direction of the portal. "Break!" This was the second time Qin Xuan had used Great Destruction, but the power was incomparable. Facing the tearing of Great Destruction, the transmission channel immediately showed signs of collapsing. Seeing this scene, Qin Xuan did not even have the time to rejoice in his heart before he sensed an extremely shocking aura rushing towards him. "You're courting death." Fadertic was furious. He really didn't expect that someone would dare to destroy the teleportation channel right under his nose. He must make this arrogant guy pay with his life. Just as Fadertic was about to make a move, a powerful, mysterious force suddenly enveloped Fadertic. The next moment, Fadertic's figure strangely returned to the platform at the peak of the heavenly void mountain and sat on the stone chair that originally belonged to Galaska. Time reversal. Fadertic, who had never encountered an attack from the law of time, could not help but be stunned after sitting back on the chair. When he came back to his senses and looked at Qin Xuan again, he found that Qin Xuan had already disappeared. At the same time, the teleportation channel collapsed. Roar! Fadertic roared at the sky. Today's matter was simply a great humiliation to him. A mere ant at the peak of the combination realm had actually destroyed the teleportation channel right under his nose and even forced him to retreat. At this time, Fadertic already knew the identity of the visitor. Other than Qin Xuan, he could not think of anyone else who had such an ability. Unfortunately, he did not recognize Qin Xuan at the first moment, so he was caught off guard against Qin Xuan. Otherwise, Qin Xuan might not have been able to use time reversal to repel him. But it was too late to say this now. "Qin Xuan, I must kill you." Just as Fadertic was unable to restrain his anger and roared at the sky, Qin Xuan had already returned to the vicinity of the interstellar teleportation channel and returned to the Algun Nebula with Lu Zi. When Qin Chuan and Lu Zi returned to the Algo Nebula, Chun Chongqing, who was guarding outside, immediately walked over and asked with concern, "How was it?" Qin Chuan smiled slightly and said, "It was scary, but not dangerous." Seeing the smile on Qin Chuan's face, Chun Chongqing immediately said in surprise, "So, your sneak attack succeeded?" Qin Chuan nodded and said, "Although it was a little dangerous, I successfully destroyed the teleportation channel of the Void Empire. At least 1 billion of their troops were blocked by me in the Void Empire and could not be transmitted over." In fact, Qin Chuan's estimation was still a little too conservative. The moment the teleportation channel was destroyed, nearly 500 million troops were directly forced to stay in the different space. Without mastering the law of space, these 500 million troops were basically doomed. And the number of troops blocked by him in the Void Empire was 1.5 billion. In other words, in this thrilling attempt, Qin Chuan single-handedly reduced the 10 billion troops of the Void Empire to only 8 billion. Although 8 billion troops was still an extremely large number, this was already the limit of what Qin Chuan could do. "Boss, this is a great contribution." Chun Chongqing laughed and said to Qin Chuan, "This is because you are the commander-in-chief, the highest commander, and there is no room for promotion. Otherwise, you would have been promoted by 2 levels." Qin Chuan laughed and said to Chun Chongqing, "After such a thing happened, the Void Empire will never let it go. Their counterattack will come soon. You must defend the Algo Nebula, at least for 2 months." Chun Chongqing nodded solemnly and said to Qin Chuan, "Don't worry, I will not let you down, boss." At this time, in the Algo Nebula, in addition to the 200 million troops commanded by Chun Chongqing at the beginning, Qin Chuan had dispatched another 1 billion troops from the Io Nebula to the Algo Nebula. In addition to the 300 million troops from the celestial planet, there were now 1.5 billion troops stationed in the Algo Nebula. This accounted for nearly half of the forces of the entire endless allied forces. However, in the face of the 8 billion troops of the Void Empire, it was still a little too little. At this time, the various forces in the endless allied forces had begun the second deployment of troops. It was estimated that more than 3 billion reinforcements would arrive in the Io Nebula in half a year. Before the reinforcements arrived, they must defend the front line, or at least the Io Nebula. Chapter 1278. Qin Chuan had launched a surprise attack on the heavenly Void continent and destroyed the teleportation channel, causing the 500 million troops of the Void Empire to be stranded in a different space. This news was not concealed and was quickly found out by Furo and Guru. When they heard this news, they were stunned by Qin Chuan's courage. Qin Chuan had actually dared to launch an attack on the heavenly Void continent's teleportation channel when he already knew that there were billions of troops of the Void Empire. Furthermore, he had escaped unscathed from Fetidic. Even dancing on the tip of a blade was not as crazy as this. Now, Fetidic had become the third supreme existence to allow Qin Chuan to escape. This also made Guru, who had yet to encounter Qin Chuan, realize that Qin Chuan was definitely not someone who could be judged by common sense. Qin Chuan must be killed before he fully matures. At this moment, Guru was extremely fearful of Qin Chuan. This was the first time he cared so much about a peak Unity stage fellow ever since he had advanced to the Tribulation stage. When Furo heard Guru's words, he sneered and said, "I already know the entire process of Qin Chuan's attack on the heavenly Void continent. First, he distorted the coordinates of the interstellar teleportation channel to arrive near the heavenly Void continent. Then, he used a spatial movement technique to suddenly approach the teleportation channel. Before anyone could react, he used the power of the law of space to collide with the teleportation channel and destroy it." Furo paused for a moment and then sighed. As for how he escaped from Fetidic's hands, he relied on the law of time again to reverse Fetidic's flow of time. Guru frowned slightly when he heard Furo's words and said, "You seem very happy." Furo glanced at Guru and said, "In the past, I was the only one who suffered a loss when facing Qin Chuan. Now that Fetidic has appeared, I'm naturally very happy. Moreover, The Void Empire suffered heavy losses this time. Why would I be unhappy? Hearing this, Guru frowned and said, "You should have told Fidect about Qinchuan earlier. That way, Fidect wouldn't have failed." Fu sneered and said, "Then before this, could you have guessed that Qinchuan had the guts to launch a surprise attack on the heavenly void continent?" Guru was rendered speechless by Qinchuan's words. If it hadn't really happened, it would have been hard for him to believe that Qinchuan had such courage. "I'm not interested in publicizing my embarrassing past." Furo looked at Guru and said, "Although Qinchuan is only at the pinnacle of the body integration stage, he has mastered the laws of time and space. He can no longer be treated as an ordinary cultivator at the pinnacle of the body integration stage. A human with the bloodline of a true dragon." Guru snorted coldly. His expression was very unsightly. Since ancient times, more than 10 million years had passed. Although many people had comprehended the laws of space, most of them were not proficient in it. Since ancient times, Guru had only heard of someone like Qinchuan who could independently inscribe interstellar teleportation arrays, distort the coordinates of interstellar teleportation arrays, and travel through space at will. Moreover, Qinchuan had mastered the even more mysterious laws of time. Just by relying on the laws of time and space, no one below the tribulation passing stage would be a match for Qinchuan. Even tribulation passing stage cultivators would be at a disadvantage if they didn't know much about Qinchuan. For example, the Demon King and Fidect. If Furo hadn't been prepared, he might not have been able to avoid Qinchuan's time reversal. Now that the human and demon races had returned to the universe under the leadership of Qinchuan, if they couldn't destroy the human and demon races in time, perhaps Qinchuan would repeat the legend of the number one person in the universe in ancient times. Qinchuan must die. Guru made up his mind to kill Qinchuan. He couldn't give Qinchuan any more time to grow. The current Tianshu continent had been transformed into a military base by the Void Empire's engineering team. The 8 billion troops of the Void Empire were moving at full speed toward the Algu Nebula under the weight of the Tianshu continent. Now, to Fidect, nothing was more important than taking revenge on Qinchuan. He wanted to break through the Algu Nebula, break through the Io Nebula, break through the Celestial Cluster, then capture all the humans and demons and kill them one by one in front of Qinchuan. He wanted to make Qinchuan feel endless pain and then kill Qinchuan. Now, he was going to carry out the first step of his revenge plan and break through the Algu Nebula. On the way to the Algu Nebula, Fidect had already investigated that the commander of the Algu Nebula was called Chun Chongxing. Not only was he a human, but he was also a very good friend of Qinchuan. Presumably, killing Chun Chongxing would make Qinchuan feel some pain. When he thought of this, Fidect couldn't bear it anymore. He actually left the Tianshu continent, broke away from the army, and went to the Algu Nebula alone. With Fidect's speed, it took him less than a day to cross the entire Tuluan Nebula and arrive at the Algu Nebula. As a second-grade warrior, when Fidect wanted to hide himself, no one except those of the same level could discover his existence. He came to Porter Star, where Chun Chongxing's guards were stationed, and easily infiltrated the military base on Porter Star. Fidect didn't know which room Chun Chongxing was in, but it didn't matter. He just needed to destroy the entire military base. If necessary, he could even destroy the entire Porter Star. Just as Fidect was about to make his move, an old figure slowly appeared in front of him. "Fidect, I've been waiting for you for a long time." Fidect looked at the old man, who suddenly appeared and frowned. "Saint Baudelo, you already knew I was coming?" Saint Baudelo looked at Fidect with sharp eyes and said in a deep voice, "Qin Shui already expected that you wouldn't be able to control the anger in your heart and sneak into the Algu Nebula alone, waiting for an opportunity to take revenge. The best target for revenge is undoubtedly Qin Chongxing. We have been waiting here for you, and sure enough, you came." In order to confuse Fidect, a large number of human warriors were stationed in the military base. At this time, these human warriors were retreating in an orderly manner. When Fidect saw this scene, he sneered. "Even if Chun Chongxing isn't here, Qinchuan will still be sad if I kill these humans. Fidect looked at Saint Baudelaire with contempt and said, "You can't stop me. I have just entered the transcending tribulation stage. I am not your opponent, this I know." Saint Baudelaire looked at Fidect and said coldly, "But I never said I came alone." As Saint Baudelaire's voice fell, a tall figure suddenly appeared behind Fidect. He was the divine Lord Apollo. Chapter 1279. When a cultivator at the peak of the body integration stage passed the immortal tribulation and advanced to the tribulation passing stage, the power in his body would undergo a tremendous change. It would transform from spiritual power to immortal power, which was of a higher grade. Immortal power had an absolute crushing effect on spiritual power. This was also the reason why a tribulation passing stage cultivator could easily crush a body integration overlord. If not for the existence of Saint Baudelaire and Apollo, Fidect could easily crush anyone in the endless allied forces. Even if the endless allied forces of 5 billion people joined hands, they may not be able to have any effect on Fidect. This is the terrifying aspect of transcending tribulation stage supreme existences. However, in the face of an opponent of the same realm, Fidect's advantage is non-existent. And in the face of two opponents of the same realm at the same time, Fidect doesn't even have the slightest advantage. He has to be careful that he will suffer a setback. Fidect is clear in his heart that Saint Baudelaire and Apollo won't do anything to him before the people in the military base below have completely evacuated. They are worried that the aftermath of the battle between them will affect the people in the military base below. Although Saint Baudelaire and Apollo are afraid, this doesn't mean that Fidect can do whatever he wants. He knows that once he makes a move on the military base below, Saint Baudelaire and Apollo will not hesitate to make a move on him. In Fidect's view, in order to kill some ants and put himself in a passive and dangerous situation, this is not worth it. You are very ambitious, wanting to keep me here. Fidect sneered. Although he is not a match for Saint Baudelaire and Apollo when they join hands, if they want to keep him here, then they're looking down on him too much. Saint Baudelaire and Apollo are silent. No one responded to Fidect. They have never had any good impression of the people of the Void Empire. Now that they are already life and death enemies, there is no need to waste their breath. When the time is right, it is more appropriate to directly fight. Seeing that Saint Baudelaire and Apollo had completely ignored him, Fidect wasn't angry at all. Since he had bumped into them, he might as well take this opportunity to test the strength of Saint Baudelaire and Apollo. Even if he encountered an accident, he was confident that he could escape unscathed. When the last person in the military base left, Saint Baudelaire, who had been silent all this time, finally made move. He raised the golden scepter in his hand high, and a light that wasn't too blazing was slowly released from the top of the golden scepter, spreading all around. This faint golden light enveloped the space within a radius of 30,000 kilometers. Sounds of prayer rang in Fedetica's ears. He looked around and saw many pale golden figures praying devoutly and reciting the teachings of the one God religion. Everyone's expression was extremely serious, but also quiet and peaceful. This made Fedetic feel like he was in the one God cathedral and was celebrating Mass. Unknowingly, the fighting spirit in Fedetica's heart gradually subsided, and the expression on his face also became tranquil and gentle. Every time I celebrate Mass in the only cathedral, I will remember everyone's performance in my heart. Then, in my domain, some of them have already aged and turned into a pile of yellow soil. Some of them are still stubbornly living on, but even more have already died on the battlefield. They were my companions in the past, and they will still be my companions in the future. Now, I will borrow their strength to obliterate your strength and punish your sins. Saint Baudelaire's expression was solemn. He looked sharply at Fedetic and said in a deep voice, "May the one true God atheist protect his people and punish the wicked." As Saint Baudelaire's voice fell, the pale golden figures who were celebrating Mass in the domain all turned their heads and looked at Fedetic in the center. The expressions on their faces were still devout and serious. They welcomed every companion who was praying to the one true God, atheists, as sincerely as they were. They wanted to reform Fetitic. What a miraculous domain power. It can actually calm down the boiling, killing intent in my heart. Fetitic slowly opened his eyes and looked at Saint Baudor. He sneered. If Fetitic thought that he could defeat him without a fight by relying on this method, then he was underestimating him too much. In just an instant, Fetitic broke free from the shackles of the domain power. Since you've welcomed me so warmly, I'll have to repay you seriously. Come, Void. As Fetitica's voice fell, a lavender mist suddenly emerged from his body. After this mist left Fetitica's body, it spread in all directions. All the golden figures who came into contact with this lavender mist gradually had a painful expression on their face. Because of this, painful noises appeared in the magnificent prayers, like the whispers of demons. Saint Baudor didn't panic when he saw this. He began to pray in a low voice. Soon, the prayers in the domain gradually converged, like the sun penetrating the dark clouds, dispersing the darkness, and dispersing all the noises and lavender mist. In the face of Saint Baudor's counterattack, Fetitic sneered and said, "How boring. Can't you have a good fight?" Before his voice fell, Fetitica's figure had already passed through the domain and appeared in front of Saint Baudor in an instant. A huge bone sword had appeared in his hand at some point, and he slashed straight at Saint Baudor. The turbulent power of the void burst out, and just the aftermath of the dissipation caused a violent earthquake on planet Porter. The rumbling sound didn't stop. In the face of Fetitica's sword, Saint Baudor waved the golden scepter in his hand to block it. The golden scepter burst out with a strong golden divine light. It was solid and indestructible. This golden scepter was the symbol of the Pope of the one God religion. It was called the Second Godly Rite, a top-grade sacred tool. However, the bone sword in Fetitica's hand was no ordinary object. It was extremely sharp. When the blade slashed at the divine light released by the Second Godly Rite, an extremely evil aura was stimulated from the snow-white bone sword. It was as if countless evil spirits were roaring and stretching out their sharp claws to tear the divine light into pieces. God says evil spirits should be killed. Saint Baudor let out a low roar, and a mysterious and mighty power emerged. The seemingly endless evil spirits melted like snow in the summer sun in an instant. God says the power of the void should dissipate. Along with Saint Baudor's low shout, the power of the void surrounding Fetitic suddenly turned into nothingness and disappeared. At the same time, the prayers in the domain stabbed at Fetitic like a sharp sword. Chapter 1280. Facing the attack of Saint Baudor's divine sword, Fidertic coldly snorted, turned around and brandished his blade, and actually cut the divine sword formed by the prayer in half. What a showy show! Fidertic growled, and his body suddenly swelled up. A large amount of void force once again surged out of his body and curled around him, turning into a light purple battle armor. Do you know, this is a real battle armor. Before his voice fell, Fidertic had already launched another attack on Saint Baudor. This time, Fidertic was serious. Asterisk boom. Asterisk Fidertic's figure was like lightning, and he once again approached Saint Baudor. He brandished the bone blade in his hand, and the void force surged towards Saint Baudor like a tide, submerging Saint Baudor in the blink of an eye. Saint Baudor brandished the Second Godly Rite in his hand, illuminating his body with divine radiance to resist the corrosion of the void force. And at this moment, God Apollo, who had been quietly watching the battle for a long time, finally moved. A huge phantom of a Dharma idol slowly emerged behind Apollo. That was the Dharma idol of the only true body atheist. Red Archbishop Sam had once used this move against Qin Xuan, but the Dharma idol summoned by Abodo was even more magnificent and huge, and its figure was also much clearer. Just as the phantom of the only true God Asai's Dharma idol appeared, it raised its hand and sent a palm strike towards Fidertic. The powerful force shattered space, and time stagnated. Even Phydertic's blade movements became sluggish. Asterisk boom. Asterisk this palm, strike hit Phydertic, and the power of the Dharma idol violently surged out, instantly shattering the battle armor formed by the void force on Phydertic's body. The void force collapsed and drifted in all directions. Phydertic's figure escaped from the palm of the Dharma idol, and suddenly appeared at the edge of the dissipating void force, seemingly unharmed. When facing Saint Bottle alone, Phydertic was still very strong, but now that Apollo had made a move, the pressure Phydertic faced suddenly increased. He no longer wanted to continue fighting, and chose to retreat. Even if Phydertic wanted to leave, Apollo wouldn't allow it. If they could make Phydertic stay, then the 8 billion troops of the Void Empire would be leaderless. This was a good thing for them. God has said that the power of the Void is ineffective. Apollo used the power of absolute law, and the Void energy in Phydertech's body suddenly froze. No matter how hard Phydertech tried, he couldn't mobilize the Void energy. Without the Void energy, Phydertech's combat power was reduced by at least half. At the same time, Saint Bodor broke through the blockade of the Void Force and brazenly charged at Phydertech. God said that the second godly right would become a divine sword with incomparable sharpness that could cut through everything. As Saint Bodolo's voice fell, the second godly right in his hand suddenly changed. It turned from a golden scepter into a golden sword blade, reflecting a cold luster as it slashed towards Phydertech. Pucci, under the blessing of absolute law, the second godly right transformed into a golden sword blade that was incomparably sharp. Nothing could stop it, and it easily cut off Phydertic's neck. Saint Bodoru thought that this blow could instantly kill Phydertech, but what he didn't expect was that Phydertech, whose neck was cut off, suddenly turned into a mass of solidified void force. Substitute. When Saint Bodor saw this scene, his expression suddenly became extremely unsightly. He didn't notice when Phydertic used the substitute technique. Just now, when he shrouded you with the void energy, Apollo slowly walked over. He glanced at the solidified void energy, and his expression was similarly unsightly. He and Saint Bodor were actually played by Phydertic. Saint Bodor solemnly said, although he escaped with the substitute technique, he definitely hasn't gone far. No need to chase. If we do, perhaps the ones besieged would be the two of us. Apollo shook his head and said to Saint Bodor, it's not like we didn't gain anything from this battle. There will be opportunities in the future. Although Saint Bodor was unwilling in his heart, he also knew that Apollo was right. They had already lost the best opportunity. Even if they chased after Phydertic, they wouldn't be able to kill him. They could only wait for the next opportunity. In the distance on the Hope, Qin Xuan and the others witnessed the battle just now. The battle between the supreme existences of the passing calamity stage and the second-grade martial artist of the Void Empire wasn't fierce, but it was extremely dangerous. The supreme existences of the passing calamity stage have already condensed their power to the extreme and perfectly controlled it. The power used in each strike is just right, and there is absolutely no waste. That's why their battle didn't seem fierce. If they were willing, they could even concentrate all their power on offense or defense. There wouldn't be any aftershocks, and if there were any, even if we just got close to the aftershocks, we would still be in danger of losing our lives. Qin Xuan sighed in his heart. The more he realized how powerful the supreme existences of the passing calamity stage were, the more lucky he felt that he was. To be able to escape from the hands of supreme existences of the passing calamity stage one after another, he really hit the jackpot. Fortunately, we didn't stay on Porter to watch the battle just now. Otherwise, just the earthquake just now would have been enough to kill us. Lu Zi had a lingering fear. Originally, they wanted to hide on Porter and watch the battle from a close distance, but Qin Xuan ordered everyone to retreat to a place at least 50,000 kilometers away and watch the battle through the surveillance equipment. This decision could be said to have successfully saved everyone. If they had stayed on Porter just now, Qin Xuan Lu Zi, and Zhou Lin, who were at the peak of the body integration stage, might have had a chance of survival. However, Chun Chongqing, who was at the Dongshu stage, would have been dead without a doubt. Previously, Fidertic deliberately used the aftershocks to attack Porter with the intention of killing us. Zhou Lin pursed her lips and said, "A supreme existence of the passing calamity stage is facing us, who are at the body integration stage. That kind of suppression is really unreasonable." Qinchuan deeply agreed. If he didn't control the laws of space and time, Qinchuan definitely wouldn't have dared to mess around in front of a supreme existence of the passing calamity stage. He was afraid that if he messed around too much, he would lose his life. Send the video of this battle to the Void Race and let them analyze Fidertic's strengths and weaknesses through this battle. Yes, analyze as much as possible. Fidertic was a second-grade warrior of the Void Empire, which was equivalent to a supreme existence of the passing calamity stage. It was too difficult to analyze Fidertic's strengths and weaknesses through a video, not only because of the gap in understanding of the realm, but also because the sample was too small. However, there was nothing wrong with trying to analyze it. If there really was a discovery, then it would be a big gain. Chapter 1281. After leaving the battlefield, Fidertic quickly returned to the Tianyu continent. Not only did he not gain anything from this battle, but he was also almost injured. This made his mood extremely bad. After returning to the Tianyu continent, Fidertic issued an order for the Tianyu continent to stop at Lunsu in the Tuluan Nebula and use Lunsu as a logistics base. Next, he would lead 2 billion troops to be stationed in Lunsu Xing. In addition, he would appoint a frontline commander to lead the remaining 6 billion troops to the junction between the Tuluan Nebula and the Oglan Nebula to prepare for war. At this time, Chun Chongqing had led his people back to Potter Star to rebuild the military base and continue to use it as the frontline command center of the Oglan Nebula. This time, Saint Baudelaire stayed by Chun Chongqing's side to protect his personal safety. This was Qinchuan's arrangement. Saint Baudelaire had no objection to this matter, because he was not only protecting Chun Chongqing's personal safety, but also protecting the territory of the Deus cluster. As the Pope, he was duty-bound. Last time, Fidertic had escaped with the help of a substitute. This time, if Fidertic dared to invade again, Saint Baudelaire would do anything to keep him here. In June of the 600,000 year of the universe calendar, the war broke out without warning. The initiating party was the Void Empire. The frontline commander of the Void Empire, Level 3 Wizard Gibbon, led 3 billion troops to attack the Oglan Nebula from 3 different directions. Chun Chongqing deployed 300 million troops to defend these 3 directions. Although the defense process was extremely difficult, in the end, the Void Empire did not break through the defense line and successfully defended the position. However, Chun Chongqing did not let his guard down because of this, because he could see that this battle was only a tentative attack by the Void Empire. After they figured out the actual situation, the Void Empire's attack would become extremely fierce. At that time, it would be quite difficult to defend against the 6 billion frontline troops of the Void Empire with only 5 billion troops in his hands. Fortunately, Qinchuan did not order Chun Chongqing to defend the Oglan Nebula to the death. He only asked him to delay as much time as possible. Otherwise, Chun Chongqing would be worried to death. As Chun Chongqing expected, after they figured out the disposition of the troops in the Oglan Nebula, the Void Empire's attack became much fiercer. In an instant, the 3 frontline lines of the Oglan Nebula were in an emergency. General, the Void Empire dispatched 5 billion troops respectively to attack the Dongfeng Galaxy, Yuyi, and Yinchuan Galaxy. The front line is in an emergency and request for support. In the command center, after Chun Chongqing heard the report from his subordinates, he immediately made a decision and said in a deep voice, "Immediately dispatch all 600 million mobile troops to the front lines of the Dongfeng, Yuyi, and Yinchuan galaxies." Hearing Chun Chongqing's order, one of the staff officers hesitated and said, "But, General, This is the only 600 million mobile troops we have. If all of them are transferred to the front line, then we won't have any troops at the rear. It will be bad if we encounter an accident. The advisor's worry was not superfluous. They all knew that the Void Empire had 6 billion troops in the front line. Although they had suffered losses in the previous war, they had only mobilized 5 billion troops. There was still more than 1 billion troops that had not been mobilized. At this time, if they transferred all the mobile troops to the front line, once the Void Empire sent more than 1 billion troops that had not been mobilized to one of the front lines, it would inevitably put great pressure on that front line. At that time, they would have no troops to reinforce them. Moreover, this was only one of the hidden dangers. Hearing the advisor's words, Chen Chongqing pursed his lips and said, "I know what you are worried about. You're not only worried that the Void Empire will concentrate their troops to attack one of the defensive lines and put great pressure on us, but you're also worried that the Void Empire will open up a fourth battlefield and even directly attack our logistics base through the asteroid belt, right?" Hearing Chen Chongqing's words, the advisor nodded and said, "General, since you have thought of this, why do you still want to transfer all the troops to the front line? To enter the Alga Nebula from the Tulun Nebula, one must pass through the Dongfeng Galaxy, Yi Galaxy, or Yinchuan Galaxy. In addition, there was only one asteroid belt that could enter the Alga Nebula from the Tulun Nebula. According to common sense, the asteroid belt's terrain was not suitable for an army to pass through. If the Void Empire wanted to force their way through the asteroid belt, the damage to their warships would be severe. If they wanted to open up a path through the asteroid belt with their cannons, their energy would be used up before they could cross the asteroid belt. Even if they passed through the asteroid belt, they would not be able to continue fighting. If a warship lost its combat power, it would be like a person without arms and legs. It would be impossible to win a battle with only the torso. As such, Chen Chongqing only sent a small army of 10 million to guard the area around shattered stars. However, if the Void Empire was determined to pass through the asteroid belt, even if there was only one intact fleet, it would be enough to cause a devastating blow to them. Therefore, in the advisor's opinion, they should leave at least 200 million mobile troops to guard the logistics base. On one hand, it was to support the front line, which was under great pressure, and on the other hand, to prevent the Void Empire from opening up a fourth battlefield with their advantage in numbers. I understand what you're saying, but you don't have to worry about the asteroid belt. I have my own ways to solve the problem. Chen Chongqing glanced at the advisor and did not say much. Seeing that Chen Chongqing had other plans, the advisor did not try to persuade him. Just as Chen Chongqing's order was passed down, the 600 million troops stationed on Porter were divided into 3 groups to support the front line. The Void Empire also received this information. After confirming that there was no mistake, the Void Empire's 1 billion troops, under the command of the rank 3 wizard Jimmy, broke into the asteroid belt and attempted to pierce through the asteroid belt directly into the abdomen of the Ogun Nebula. Ji Mao's move wasn't that brilliant. In fact, it was somewhat simple. Anyone with a brain would have thought that Ji Mao would do this. However, Chen Chongqing had no other choice. He only had 5 billion troops, while the Void Empire had 6 billion troops. In the face of such a huge disparity in military strength, even if Chen Chongqing wanted to guard against Ji Mao, he wouldn't be able to do anything. He could only try his best to do what he could and leave the rest to fate. The moment the 1 billion troops of the Void Empire under Jimmy's command entered the asteroid belt, a spaceship that looked like a towering tree slowly arrived at the edge of the asteroid belt. Chapter 1282. When the Hope stopped at the edge of the asteroid belt, Qin Xuan, Lu Zi, and Zhou Lin appeared on the deck. They had come here in secret. Other than Chen Chongqing, no one else knew about their whereabouts. The reason they were here was because of the 1 billion soldiers led by Jimmy. It was also because of Qin Xuan's appearance that Chen Chongqing was not worried about the safety of the asteroid belt. "We're already here. What do you plan to do?" Lu Zi looked around and was filled with anticipation for the arrival of the 1 billion soldiers from the Void Empire. Even the craziest battle they had faced before was only a few tens of millions of demons. This time, However, they were going to face 1 billion soldiers from the Void Empire. The word crazy was no longer enough to describe it. Qin Chuan thought about it seriously and told Lu Zi, "To be honest, I haven't decided yet." Zhou Lin, who was standing to the side, couldn't help but glance at Qin Chuan. "If we want to leave now, we should still be able to make it." Qin Chuan smiled. "I'm just kidding. Actually, what we need to do is very simple. We need to send the 1 billion soldiers into the alien space." "You're making it sound too simple. As long as a portion of the 1 billion soldiers have a problem, they'll notice it immediately." Zhou Lin looked at Qin Chuan and shook her head. "Unless they're all idiots, they won't be able to react in time. Even at their fastest speed, it would take 1 hour for the 1 billion soldiers to leave the asteroid belt. As long as the commander of the Void Empire wasn't an idiot, he would be able to notice the anomaly and stop the rest of the soldiers from moving forward. Therefore, Qin Chuan's plan could be said to be whimsical. I understand your concerns, but please believe me, I can solve this problem." Qin Chuan, of course, could think of the same thing. If he couldn't solve this problem, he wouldn't have come here in the first place. LVZ smiled when she heard this and said, "Then go ahead. We'll support you with all our might." Qin Chuan smiled and asked, "Do you know what it means to invite a gentleman into a jar?" It was already the 3rd day since Ji Shuo led his army of 1 billion into the asteroid belt. At this time, the army had already reached the central region of the asteroid belt. In another 2 days, they would pass through the asteroid belt and enter the hinterland of the Algo Nebula. In order to make this attack go smoothly, Ji Shuo had brought a total of more than 30,000 warships, of which 20,000 were used to open a path. As long as there were 10,000 warships that could maintain their combat effectiveness after passing through the asteroid belt, it would be enough for him to sweep through the hinterland of the Algo Nebula. Then he would turn around and attack the East Wind, the Right Wing, and the Silver River Galaxy. With a pincer attack, he would completely annihilate the 1.5 billion troops of the endless Allied army. Buzz! The door of the command center slowly opened, and a figure walked in from the outside. "Grand Magus, our informants have returned," he said respectfully to Ji Tao. "The endless Allied army has only deployed a small troop of about 10 million soldiers in the outer ring of the Shattered Stars." "Only 10 million soldiers?" Ji Shuo snorted and said, "The frontline commander of the endless Allied army really looks down on us." Ji Shuo did not care if there were any more ambushes outside the 10 million soldiers. Even if there would not be too many of them, and they would not be able to cause any damage to his army of 1 billion soldiers. As for the supreme existences of the tribulation stage, Ji Shuo had also sent people to investigate. Pope Saint Baudelo had always been protecting Chun Chongqing and had never left, while the other divine lord, Apollo, was on the celestial planet protecting Qin Chuan. In addition, a mysterious tribulation stage, supreme existence of the Tian people, was guarding the rubble star and had always been on guard against Zerg. It was impossible for him to come to the Algo Nebula. As for the divine lord of the Tian people, before the flames of war spread to the celestial cluster, he would probably not take the initiative to come to the Algo Nebula. In other words, as long as they did not take the initiative to find trouble with Chun Chongqing, they would not encounter the supreme existences of the tribulation stage. Under such circumstances, no one in the Algo Nebula would be a match for them. As for Qin Chuan, who was known as the strongest person below the tribulation stage, the intelligence personnel had confirmed that Qin Chuan had always been on the celestial planet and had never left. However, even if Qin Chuan came, Ji Shuo would not be too afraid. He did not believe that Qin Chuan would have the courage to face an army of 1 billion soldiers. After thinking about it, Ji Shuo really could not think of anyone who could affect their army of 1 billion soldiers. Therefore, there was no reason for him to lose this battle. As long as he carried out the plan step by step, there would be no problems. Just as Ji Shuo was thinking about these things, an intelligence personnel suddenly sent a rather special message. 13,000 kilometers ahead, a spatial rift about 3 square meters in size suddenly appeared. When he saw this message, Ji Shuo just glanced at it casually and ordered the army to avoid the spatial rift. Spatial rifts often appeared in the Shattered Stars belt, so it was not a rare thing. In the following journey, the army of the Void Empire encountered 4 more spatial rifts, which were also about 3 square meters in size. After the first experience, the army of the Void Empire made the same decision to avoid the spatial rifts. However, the appearance of more and more spatial rifts still made Jishua feel a little puzzled. In just a short journey of 30,000 kilometers, we actually encountered 16 spatial rifts. Isn't that a little too much? Jishua lowered his head and pondered. He always felt that there was something strange about this matter, but he could not tell what was strange about it. At this moment, the intelligence personnel sent another message to Jishua. They found a 17th spatial rift in front of them, but this one was very large, about 1,000 square meters in size. When he saw this message, Jishua frowned and said, "Something is wrong. Something is really wrong." Just as Jishua was muttering in a low voice, the latest message was sent. At the tail of the army, another huge spatial rift appeared. This is not right. Jishua's expression changed greatly. Just as he was about to speak to his subordinates, the command center suddenly shook violently, as if there was a violent earthquake. However, they were in space, so how could there be an earthquake? Great wizard! The space shattered. In the Shattered Stars belt, the space shattered inch by inch, and huge black holes appeared one after another around the army of the Void Empire. The terrifying suction force acted on the army of the Void Empire and directly swallowed the army. Chapter 1283. Asteroid Belt. Qin Xuan and the others stood on the deck of the Hope, looking at the collapsed space in the distance. The huge black hole swallowed everything around it, whether it was the Void Empire's army or the debris in the asteroid belt. Nothing was spared. Even if some of the Void Empire's army were at the edge of the black hole and were lucky enough to escape, they couldn't escape the attack of Qin Xuan and the others. The only pity was that Qin Xuan and the others were only 3 people, so they couldn't wipe out all the remnants of the Void Empire's army. Some of them still managed to escape. It's a pity that in order to hide our whereabouts and not arouse the suspicion of the Void Empire, we can only go into battle lightly. If we could bring the 10 million soldiers here, it would definitely be enough to wipe out the remnants of the army. Qin Xuan said regretfully. At least 200 to 300 million soldiers of the Void Empire had escaped, and when they returned, it would cause them a lot of trouble. It would be better if they could all stay here. Hearing Qin Xuan's words, Lu Zi smiled and said, "Don't be too greedy. It's already a great victory to be able to kill so many soldiers of the Void Empire." Zhou nodded and sighed. "That's right. We've earned enough from this battle. Let's go. There's no point in staying here." Qin Xuan looked at the black hole again and said to the others, "Let's go to Porter." Universe Calendar, Year 14. 6 million July, the 24th day of the outbreak of the war, and also the 6th day of the Void Empire's attack on Dongfeng, UE, and Silver River systems. On the battlefield in full swing, a shocking news suddenly spread. Void Empire's frontline commander, Grade 3 Wizard Gillo, led an army of 1 billion soldiers and raided the hinterland of Augustus from the asteroid belt. In the end, they encountered Qin Xuan in the center of the asteroid belt. Qin Xuan destroyed the army by himself, and Gillo's whereabouts were unknown. When the news reached the front line, all the troops of the Void Empire thought it was just a fake news, but when they tried to contact Gillo's headquarters, they found that they couldn't get in touch. They finally panicked. At the same time, Feditic, who stayed in the logistics base of Luansu, issued a temporary retreat order to the front line. When Feditic bypassed the frontline commander and directly issued the order, the frontline troops immediately realized that the rumor might be true. The army of 1 billion soldiers commanded by Gillo was really gone. Luan planet. When Frederick learned that more than half of the 1 billion soldiers led by Ji Shuo had perished in the Shattered Stars belt, he was so angry that he almost vomited blood. And when he learned that it was all done by Qin Xuan alone, almost without shedding a drop of blood, he almost went crazy. Qin Xuan, Qin Xuan, It's this Qin Xuan again. Feditic was furious. Qin Xuan first raided the transmission channel in the Tianshu continent, forcibly blocking the arrival of the remaining 2 billion soldiers, and then killed the 500 million soldiers in a different space. This time, he created a super large black hole in the asteroid belt and swallowed nearly 700 million soldiers of the Void Empire. He was simply the nemesis of their Void Empire. Looking at Feditic, who was about to go crazy, the skeletal horse that had just arrived from the only continent frowned slightly and said, "Do you need me to go to the front line?" In the past, the skeletal horse looked down on Qin Xuan, thinking that Qin Xuan was just an ant that could be easily crushed at any time. But after this ant continuously caused great damage to them, the skeletal horse put away its contempt for Qin Xuan and began to pay attention to Qin Xuan. Hearing the skeletal horse's words, Feditic's face became gloomy and he said coldly, "Invite Furu and Guru to Lunsu. I want to discuss with them about attacking the Algu Nebula together." Now that the war had just begun, their Void Empire had already lost nearly 1.5 billion soldiers, but they couldn't even break through the endless Allied army's line of defense. This loss was too painful. This was also because the communication between the Void Empire and this side of the universe was inconvenient. If the news of the defeat at the front line was sent back to the Void Empire, he would probably be demoted to the bottom. Right now, he couldn't care less about face. He just wanted to end this war as quickly as possible and use the blood of the endless Allied army to wash away the shame that Qin Xuan brought to him. The skeletal horse frowned slightly and said, "Wouldn't this damage the reputation of our Void Empire? We have more than 6 billion soldiers in addition to the logistics army. If we all go to the front line, we will be able to break through the Algu Nebula and even the celestial planet." Hearing the skeletal horse's words, Feditic gnashed his teeth and said, "What I want is not only to break through the Algu Nebula. I want to launch an all-out war. I want Zerd to attack the celestial cluster from the Chaos Rock star. I want to launch an all-out war." The skeletal horse looked at Feditic in surprise and said, "But according to our original plan, we should wait until Lord Neri arrives before launching an all-out war. I can't wait. After this matter, I will personally explain to Neri." Feditic looked at the skeletal horse with a gloomy expression. Now, no one could stop his determination to launch an all-out war. He wanted Qin Xuan to pay the price for his previous actions. The Void Empire's full-scale retreat was something worth celebrating for the endless Allied army, because it meant that they had blocked the attack of the Void Empire and won this war. When the news reached Porter Star, the entire logistics base was in an uproar. Everyone was excited, and their faces were brimming with smiles of surprise. They used 5 billion soldiers to block the attack of 5 billion soldiers of the Void Empire. And the most exciting thing was that Qin Xuan, as the commander-in-chief, had single-handedly defeated the 1 billion soldiers of the Void Empire that were prepared to open up the fourth battlefield. He had directly destroyed the frontline command of the Void Empire. If not for this, the Void Empire wouldn't have retreated when they had a certain advantage in the front line. In short, the victory of the endless Allied army was entirely due to Qin Xuan. When Qin Xuan heard the news that he had single-handedly wiped out the 1 billion soldiers of the Void Empire, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Not to mention that more than 300 million soldiers of the Void Empire had fled back to the Void Empire. He was able to achieve such a huge victory mainly because Jimmy had discovered the problem too late. In fact, he wasn't as powerful as the rumors said. I have heard 7 versions of the battle in the Shattered Stars. The most exaggerated version actually said that I had slapped 500 million soldiers of the Void Empire to death with a single slap, and with a flip of my hand, another 500 million soldiers were also killed. That's too exaggerated. Qin Xuan looked at Chen Changxing. He had a feeling that this version of the story had come from Chen Changxing's mouth. Chen Changxing laughed and said, "This isn't my idea. It's everyone's idea. Our endless Allied army is weaker than the demon faction, so we have to create an image of a god of war to boost your morale. Besides, although it's exaggerated, it's not much different from the truth." Chapter 1284. When he heard Chen Changxing's words, Qin Chuan couldn't help but think of two words: God of War. Chen Changxing and the others spared no effort in publicizing the Battle of Shattered Stars, and even exaggerated his image in this battle. They wanted to create an image of him as an invincible god of war. This was like faith, a kind of spiritual strength that supported the bravery of the soldiers. As long as the god of war was there, they would not lose. Qin Chuan had never liked this kind of thing, but now that things had developed to this point, if he appeared to explain, it would be a mess. Have you ever thought about what would happen if I made a wrong decision one day? What kind of impact would it have on everyone's faith in the god of war? Qin Chuan looked at Chen Changxing and felt a little helpless. He was not the god of war, so when facing the attack of the demon faction, it was impossible for him to always make the right decision and not make any mistakes. The more glorious the image of the god of war was now, the more tragic it would be when the time came. Hearing Qin Chuan's words, Chen Changxing laughed and said, "Boss, we have also thought of what you can think of. When the time comes, if there is an accident, naturally someone will stand up and take the blame for you. At that time, even if people complain, they will only blame the person who took the blame, not you. You will always be the god of war." Qin Chuan was slightly stunned when he heard this. He really didn't expect Chen Changxing and the others to think of a way to help him maintain the image of the god of war. But was this really appropriate? Seeing the obscure expression on Qin Chuan's face, Chen Changxing coughed lightly and said to Qin Chuan, "Boss, to be honest, we have no other choice." There were good and bad sides to creating the image of the god of war for Qin Chuan. It was just that compared to the bad side that everyone was worried about, in fact, everyone was more eager to see the good side. We only have 5 billion soldiers, and now we only have 3 billion left. The Void Empire has at least 6 billion soldiers, double our military strength. If we add in the Nephilim and Zerg, their military strength might reach 10 billion. It is too difficult for us to stop them. Chen Changxing sighed. Because of the disparity in military strength, the soldiers of the endless allied army were actually very uneasy and nervous. These soldiers needed a glorious and great image to support their beliefs, to make them bravely fight and struggle. Previously, when Qin Chuan faced the Nephilim, he won one battle after another. In the end, when he faced with the Tribulation Stage Prince, he led hundreds of millions of soldiers to safely retreat from the front lines. Afterwards, Qin Chuan led the Nephilim's army and recaptured the Nephilim's Nephilim and Nephilim Nebula. Then, Qin Chuan destroyed the transmission channel of the Void Empire by himself, causing the Void Empire to lose 2 billion soldiers. Now, Qin Chuan once again relied on his own strength to ambush the Void Empire in the asteroid belt, causing the Void Empire to lose more than 600 million soldiers, laying the foundation for their victory in the defense of the Nephilim. Since the beginning of this huge war, Qin Chuan had always played the role of a powerful hero. From the earliest appearance on the battlefield until now, Qin Chuan had never lost, nor had he given up on any of his comrades. This was a commander that everyone longed to meet. With such a commander, the soldiers were willing to believe that they could defeat the strong with the few and defeat the strong with the weak. Therefore, Qin Chuan must be the god of war. This was the conclusion that many people came to after discussion. It wasn't something that Chen Changxing could decide on his own. Qin Chuan was silent. He didn't know what to say. In this war, no one wanted to lose, and if they didn't want to lose, they had to find another way to raise the morale and inspire the people. Therefore, the god of war couldn't lose. The ones who lost were others. Understanding this, Qin Chuan pursed his lips and said to Chen Changxing, "I know. From now on, I'm the god of war." Chen Changxing grinned and said to Qin Chuan, "Boss, you've always been the god of war." When the news of the Void Empire's defeat at the front lines reached Frost's ears, he couldn't help but sneer. Back then, when their demon army faced Qin Chuan, they lost again and again. Guru and Fetidic both ridiculed their demon race for being superficial. Now, The Void Empire's army also suffered losses in front of Qinchuan. He wanted to see if Fedidic would still have the face to ridicule him in the future. Sir, Void Empire's Commander-in-Chief Fedidic invites you to planet Lunsu for a meeting. Hearing his adjutant's words, Fro nodded and said, I understand. On the other side, Guru also received Fedidic's invitation and went to planet Lunsu for a meeting. When Fro and Guru arrived at planet Lunsu, they thought that Fedidic wanted to discuss the matter of jointly dispatching troops to attack the Algo Nebula. However, they didn't expect that Fedidic actually wanted to start an all-out war. It's too early to start an all-out war now. Fro frowned and said, Our demon race is currently exploring the dark universe. We still haven't found a passage to the nebulas occupied by the small and medium-sized forces. If you want to start an all-out war now, it's not that our demon race isn't willing to contribute, it's that we don't have the opportunity to do so. Guru pondered for a moment and said to Fedidic, I know that you've suffered losses in the hands of Qinchuan. You're angry and eager to take revenge. However, now is clearly not the time to start an all-out war. If we can't take the advantage here and attack the Celestial Cluster, we'll put a lot of pressure on the Tian people and force them to transfer that mysterious tribulation passing stage existence to Io Nebula. It'll be very difficult for us Zerg to attack the Celestial Cluster from the Celestial Cluster. Whether it was Fro or Guru, they weren't opposed to starting an all-out war. However, if they wanted to start an all-out war, they needed to look at the right timing. Clearly, now wasn't the right time to start an all-out war. They still needed some time to prepare. Hearing this, Fedidic snorted and said, My Void Empire has already lost billions of soldiers. How many more soldiers do you want my Void Empire to lose before you're willing to start an all-out war? Hearing this, Fro glanced at the gloomy Fedidic and said, Now is really not the time to start an all-out war. We can send troops to attack the Audon Nebula and help you relieve the pressure. Guru nodded and said, That's right. Our holy race can also send troops to attack the Audon Nebula. Your Void Empire only needs to be responsible for the East Wind and Excellence defense lines. Leave the Silver River defense line to us. Seeing that Fro and Guru weren't willing to start an all-out war now, Fedidic was furious, but he couldn't do anything about it. After this incident, the three forces of the demon faction had become divided at heart. Chapter 1285. At the end of July, year 14, 6 million of the universe calendar, the demon faction once again launched an attack on the Endless Coalition army. This time, the demon faction was divided into 4 groups. The Void Empire was responsible for attacking the Eastwind Galaxy and Excellence Galaxy. Zer was responsible for attacking the Silver River Galaxy, and the Nephilim was responsible for attacking the Audon Galaxy. In just one day, the demon faction had invested more than 5 billion soldiers into the battlefield. On the other side, the Endless Coalition army's 4 defense lines were in a state of emergency, asking for reinforcements. At this time, the 2 billion soldiers in the Io Nebula had been mobilized by Qinchuan. Except for the logistics troops that were left behind to transport the necessary resources, the rest of the troops were transferred to the Audon Nebula, setting up a defense line in the Audon Nebula and Iron Chain Galaxy. At the same time, Qinchuan ordered Chun Chongqing and Tian 3 to retreat in an orderly manner after 3 days of defense, giving up the current defense line. From the beginning, Qinchuan had already set the strategic goal of gradually shrinking the troops, rebuilding the defense line, and stalling for time as much as possible. Therefore, Chun Chongqing and Tian 3 did not have any objections to Qinchuan's decision. After 3 days of defense, Chun Chongqing did not hesitate to give up the 3 defense lines in the Eastwind Galaxy, Excellence Galaxy, and Silver River Galaxy, directly leading the troops to retreat to the Iron Chain Galaxy. Because Tian 3's troops were in the Audon Galaxy, it would take them 3 days to return to the Iron Chain Galaxy. Qinchuan specially sent people to lead the troops to receive them. However, unexpectedly, after the Nephilim attacked the Audon Nebula, they did not have the intention to pursue Tian 3's troops. Instead, They divided their troops to occupy the entire Audon Nebula, which made it convenient for Tion 3's troops to retreat to the Iron Chain Galaxy. When the news of the Endless Coalition army abandoning the various defense lines and retreating to the Iron Chain Galaxy was sent back to Lun Su, Fidek did not feel happy. Instead, he became more and more angry. Before this, the Void Empire's army had crazily attacked the Dongfeng Galaxy, the Excellent Galaxy, and the Silver River Galaxy, but they had suffered heavy losses. Now, before the Nephilim race and Zerg could really do anything, the Endless Allied army had abandoned the 3 defense lines and even spat out the Audon Nebula. Didn't this mean that the Void Empire's army was far weaker than the Nephilim race and Zerg? Otherwise, why would the Endless Allied army be able to defend themselves to the death when facing the Void Empire's attack, and even counterattack in a desperate situation? Why would they retreat so easily after the Nephilim race and Zerg attacked? Just thinking about it made him feel uncomfortable. Ever since he became a Grade 2 martial warrior, this was the first time he felt so aggrieved. Fortunately, this was also a piece of good news. After taking down the Eastern Wind System, the Superior Art System, and the Silver River System, the Auga Nebula only had the Iron Chain Galaxy to defend. As long as they could break through the Iron Chain Galaxy, they could go straight to the Celestial Planet. On the 3rd day after breaking through the 3 major lines of defense, Furu and Guru arrived at the Eastern Wind System and met with Fidek, who came with the Heavenly Void Continent. When they first met, Furu smiled and said to Fidek, "Fortunately, we didn't fail our mission. Our Nephilim race army has completely occupied the Audon Nebula and completed our mission." On the other side, Guru also smiled and said, "Our holy race army has also broken through the Silver River System." Guru paused for a moment, then said with a subtle tone, "It doesn't feel that difficult." Hearing Guru's words, Fidek's face immediately turned ashen. Of course, he knew that it wasn't that difficult this time. Clearly, the Endless Allied army had deliberately abandoned the front line of defense and concentrated their forces in the Iron Chain Galaxy. But no matter what, the Endless Allied army's resistance had indeed weakened after the Nephilim race and Zerg joined the battle. No matter how angry Fidek was, he could only suffer in silence. Furu and Guru only chatted for a while and then covered up the matter. They could feel that Fidek was on the verge of exploding. If they continued to mock and ridicule him, Fidek would probably explode. Although they knew that this alliance would break up sooner or later, they couldn't do so now. So soon, Guru changed the topic and asked Fidek, "Next, we should attack the Iron Chain Galaxy. What do you plan to do?" In the Auga Nebula, other than the 3 lines of defense in the Eastern Wind System, the Excellent Art System, and the Silver River System, the Endless Allied army still had one last line of defense, which was the Iron Chain Galaxy. Previously, Gale led an army of 500 million to stop Zerg's forces here. However, Guru imitated Qin Chuan and executed the decapitation tactic on Gale, breaking through the Iron Chain Galaxy in one fell swoop. Now that the defenders of the various lines of defense had all retreated to the Iron Chain Galaxy and rebuilt their defenses, it wouldn't be so easy for the demon faction to break through the Iron Chain Galaxy like last time. Fidek snorted and said, "This matter isn't as complicated as you think. As long as the 3 of us attack together and destroy the command center of the Endless Allied army, not to mention the Iron Chain Galaxy, we can even take down the Celestial Planet. We just need to do the same and attack the Io Nebula again. The Tion people won't just sit by and watch." The mysterious Ascension Stage expert guarding the Chaos Star will definitely be transferred to the Io Nebula. Then, we can start preparing for an all-out war. Hearing Fidek's words, Furu frowned slightly and said, "That's too hasty. Moreover, other than Apollo and Pope Baudelo, the Endless Allied army might not necessarily have a 3rd Ascension Stage expert. So what if there is?" Fidek glanced at Furu and said, "Even if they have another Ascension Stage expert hiding in the dark, the 3 of us can still retreat easily." Seeing that Fidek was determined to carry out the decapitation plan, Furu couldn't help but frown. He looked at Guru, hoping that Guru would stand out and say something. Faichik noticed a change in Furu's gaze and turned to Guru as well. He asked, "Guru, what do you think?" Hearing Faichik's words, Guru pursed his lips and said, "We can give it a try, but I don't think it's the right time." Faichik frowned slightly and asked, "What do you mean?" Guru looked at Faichik and said, "If we carry out the decapitation tactic now, we will only be able to kill Chen Chongqing. Once Chen Chongqing dies, we will be able to capture the Iron Chain Galaxy, but it won't be so easy for us to use the decapitation tactic after that. Why don't we leave the decapitation tactic until the end? After determining Qin Chuan's location, we will deal a fatal blow to Qin Chuan. Only by killing Qin Chuan can we deal the greatest blow to the endless allied army." After saying that, Guru paused for a moment before continuing. "Moreover, the person you hate the most should be Qin Chuan, right? Why don't we do as I say and leave the decapitation tactic to Qin Chuan?" Chapter 1286. Iron Chain Galaxy. At this time, the endless allied army had gathered nearly 3 billion soldiers in the Iron Chain Galaxy. This was already the endless allied army's combat power apart from the necessary logistics forces. Clearly, the endless allied army was preparing to wage war against the demon faction in the Iron Chain Galaxy. Although the endless allied army had just abandoned the Eastern Wind Galaxy, Excellence Galaxy, and Silver River Galaxy, as well as the entire Audon Nebula, Qin Chuan had already informed Tian San and Chen Chongqing of this tactical retreat plan a long time ago. Therefore, most of the soldiers were already aware of this matter. When they retreated, they were very straightforward. No one felt that they had lost the battle. The current retreat was only for the sake of a stronger return in the future. The frontline soldiers all believed that as long as Qin Chuan was still their commander and the god of war was still around, they would definitely be able to defeat the demon faction again. Qin Chuan was very clear about the expectations in the hearts of the frontline soldiers. It was precisely because of this that he felt immense pressure. He constantly stared at the Iron Chain Galaxy's defensive line, looking for the slightest flaw in it and then patching it up. The more rigorous the defensive line was, the less pressure they would face when defending against the demon faction's attack. The fewer soldiers would be sacrificed, and the more advantageous the situation would be for them. After Qin Chuan finished inspecting the fourth defensive line, Chen Chongqing, who was beside Qin Chuan, said to Qin Chuan, "Boss, let's take a rest." Qin Chuan shook his head and said, "The demon faction's attack could come at any time. I must inspect the 14 planets on the front line before the war starts. I must make sure there are no problems before I rest." As an overlord at the pinnacle of Combination Realm, it was not a problem for Qin Chuan to not rest for a period of time. However, the problem was that Qin Chuan had just used the power of the spatial maxim to shatter an area with a radius of tens of thousands of kilometers. He had consumed a lot of energy and had not had a good rest until now. If not for this, Chen Chongqing would not have advised him. However, others may not know about Qin Chuan's current situation, but Qin Chuan himself was very clear about it. His current state was very good. After his spiritual force advanced to the spirit condensation stage, he no longer felt tired. No matter when, he was always in high spirits. Chen Chongqing was only trying to persuade him. Seeing that Qin Chuan wasn't willing to rest, he didn't say anything else. He just silently followed beside Qin Chuan and accompanied Qin Chuan to inspect the defensive fortifications, looking for flaws. By the time Qin Chuan and Chen Chongqing finished inspecting the fortifications of the 14 planets, it was already half a month later. At this time, Qin Chuan finally returned to the logistics base in Aogu City to prepare for a pre-war meeting. Qin Chuan looked at the people sitting at the table and said, "Although I have experienced a lot of battles, I don't know much about military matters. You can talk about your experience in defense." Hearing Qin Chuan's words, Tian San immediately said, "Marshal Qin, we only have 3 billion troops in the front line, but there are 14 defensive lines. We should focus on the distribution of troops." Qin Chuan nodded and said, "I also thought of this point, but I don't know how to distribute them. Tian raised his hand and turned on the projector in front of the table, then projected the 14 planets of the Iron Chain Galaxy in front of everyone. He pointed to the projector and said to Qin Xuan, "Marshal Qin, I suggest that we concentrate 1/3 of our forces on the 4th, 5th, and 6th lines of defense, 1/3 of our forces on the other lines of defense, and the remaining 1/3 of our forces will be used as a mobile force to adapt to changing circumstances." Hearing Tian's words, Qin Xuan pondered for a moment and asked, "Why should we concentrate most of our forces on the 4th, 5th, and 6th lines of defense? Is it because Augustus is right behind us?" Tian nodded and said, "Yes, as long as the demon faction breaks through the 4th, 5th, and 6th lines of defense, they can go straight to Augustus. So, I guess the demon faction will concentrate most of their forces on attacking the 4th, 5th, and 6th lines of defense." Hearing this, Qin Xuan looked up at the others and asked, "What do you suggest?" Pope Baudelaire, who was sitting on the left side of Qin Xuan, heard this and asked Qin Xuan, "Marshal Qin, when do you think you can break through to the peak of unity stage?" Hearing Baudelaire's words, everyone present was stunned for a moment. No one expected Baudelaire to suddenly ask this question at this time. Qin Xuan looked at Baudelaire with some subtle eyes and asked, "Pope, what do you want to say?" Baudelaire looked at Qin Xuan and said, "There are many people who can command the frontline soldiers to fight. I think after setting the basic strategy, it's best for you to concentrate on cultivation. I believe with Marshal Qin's talent, as long as you break through to the peak of unity stage, it's just around the corner for you to reach the tribulation stage." When everyone heard Baudelaire's words, their gazes towards him became extremely subtle. If transcending the immortal tribulation was so easy, then there wouldn't be so many people who were stuck at the peak of the unity stage and didn't dare to step into the peak of the unity stage all this time. Others didn't know much about Qin Xuan, but Baudelaire still had a certain understanding of Qin Xuan. Qin Xuan controlled the law of thunder, and the tribulation stage couldn't stop Qin Xuan. If Qin Xuan could become a supreme existence in the tribulation stage, it would have a great impact on the direction of this war. Pope's suggestion is not bad. Huang Feng glanced at the crowd, then looked at Qin Xuan and said, "The stronger Qin Xuan is, the better it is for our endless allied forces. If Marshal Qin can reach the tribulation stage as soon as possible, our chances of winning will become greater." But this is the tribulation stage, after all. Someone frowned and said, "What if he fails?" Since ancient times, 8 or 9 out of 10 cultivators at the peak of unity stage died in the process of tribulation stage. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so few supreme existences at the tribulation stage. If Qin Xuan listened to Saint Baudelaire's words and ended up perishing in the process of transcending the immortal tribulation, then things would be troublesome. "Pope, you've spent at least 1,000 years at the peak of unity stage and only recently reached the tribulation stage. Isn't it inappropriate for you to advise Marshal Qin like this?" Someone looked at Baudelaire with a slightly vigilant gaze. It was no wonder that others felt that Baudelaire had ulterior motives. It was just that Baudelaire's suggestion was completely unreliable in the eyes of most people. Today's meeting will end here for the time being. If no one has any objections, then the military deployment will be arranged according to Third Elder Tian's suggestion. At this point, Qin Xuan paused for a moment, then said to Baudelaire, "Pope, let's talk in private." Chapter 1287. When everyone heard that Qin Xuan wanted to have a private chat with Saint Baudelaire, their expressions became a little subtle. They knew in their hearts that no one could resist the temptation of advancing to the crossing calamity stage. After everyone left, only Qin Xuan and Saint Baudelaire were left in the conference room. Qin Xuan looked at Saint Baudelaire curiously and asked, "Pope, if I want to advance to the crossing calamity stage now, what do I need to do?" Hearing Qin Xuan's question, Saint Baudelaire asked in reply, "Qin Shui, aren't you afraid that I'm deliberately luring you to cross the immortal tribulation?" Qin Xuan smiled and said to Saint Baudelaire, "Don't call me Qin Shui in private. Just call me Qin Xuan. Moreover, I still have the most basic judgment. If I don't have full confidence, I won't cross the immortal tribulation. Qin was not a fool. It was impossible for him to believe Saint Baudelaire without any doubt when he said that he had the chance to advance to the crossing calamity stage. He needed to understand the process and determine whether he had the strength or not before making a decision. Saint Baudelaire nodded gently and said, "It's good that you have your own judgment. Although I think you have a great chance to advance to the crossing calamity stage, I'm not 100% sure." Qin asked curiously, "If I want to advance to the crossing calamity stage, the biggest difficulty is to cross the immortal tribulation, right?" According to Qin's understanding, it seemed that everyone was afraid of the power of the immortal tribulation. As for other things, he didn't know much. However, Saint Baudelaire shook his head and said, "If you want to cross the immortal tribulation, you must first be qualified to trigger it." Qin was a little surprised and asked, "It is said that as long as the overlords in the peak of the combination stage use too much power, they will trigger the immortal tribulation. Isn't that true?" Saint Baudelaire shook his head again and said, "This is just a rumor." Qin immediately said, "Pope, please enlighten me. Before we talk about triggering the immortal tribulation and crossing the immortal tribulation, let's talk about the combination stage." Saint Baudelaire looked at Qin and asked, "What kind of change do you think there should be from the early stage to the peak stage of the combination stage?" Hearing Saint Baudelaire's question, Qin thought for a moment and said, "It should be a change from the superficial to the meticulous." It was well known that the first thing a cultivator had to do when advancing to the form synthesis stage from the exceptional stage of the Dongshu realm was to fuse their power into one. Spiritual power could be used as spiritual power, and spiritual power could also be used as spiritual power. After all kinds of power were fused together, they would become a kind of power that could be used as any kind of power. This kind of power was still called spiritual power, but it was no longer pure spiritual power. It had to go to the early stage to the peak. To the early of combination. Complete. To the realm. Qin also knew that the realm of combination to the crossing tribulation stage was a process of the transformation of the spiritual power in the body to a higher level of immortal power. After hearing Qin's answer, Saint Baudelaire nodded and said, "You are right. The change from the early stage to the peak stage of the combination stage is indeed a process of the fusion of the spiritual power in the body. When the fusion reaches a level of perfection, it can be transformed to immortal power. That is, the cultivator can meet the conditions to trigger the immortal tribulation." Hearing Saint Baudelaire's explanation, Qin's heart moved slightly and said, "That is to say, to trigger the immortal tribulation, I must first perfectly fuse the spiritual power in the body to reach a critical point, right?" Saint Baudelaire nodded and replied, "As far as I know, when you advance to the combination stage, you fused many kinds of power. Just the power of law alone, there are two kinds." Qin nodded and replied, "The law of thunder and the law of space were fused when I advanced to the combination stage. After that, I comprehended the law of time. I want to fuse the law of time, but I don't have a clue yet." Saint Baudelaire sighed and said, "You have fused too many powers. They are too heterogeneous." Qin smiled helplessly and said, "But these powers are what I need. I can't give up any of them." For Qin, the law of thunder, the law of space, and the law of time were three kinds of power that he could not give up in any case. In addition, his spiritual power, yuanying power, and even the void power were also indispensable in the process of fusion. It seemed heterogeneous, but if one wanted to get rid of one of them, it was impossible to give up. Therefore, Qin could only take all of them. Moreover, Qin's growth speed was really too fast. Many of the powers he had fused had almost never been used. For example, Qin had almost never used the yuanying power and spiritual power. Others had to settle for many years in the yuanying stage before they could advance to the deity transformation stage. However, Qin had only stayed in the yuanying stage for more than a year. Excluding the 10 years of sleep, Qin Chuan had only cultivated for more than 10 years since he started cultivating at the age of 17. He had already reached the peak of the combination stage from the most basic body tempering stage. He had walked a path that others might not be able to complete in several lifetimes. Saint Baudelaire looked at Qin Chuan with an extremely complicated gaze and said, "Your experience is really too special." Even the human emperor in ancient times was only at the yuanying stage when he was the same age as you. Sometimes growing up too fast might not be a good thing. Although Qin Chuan had tried his best to consolidate his foundation, with the continuous improvement of his realm, it was inevitable that there would still be some omissions. Now, if Qin Chuan wanted to advance to the tribulation stage, he had to clean up all the omissions in the past from beginning to end. This was a relatively complicated matter that required time. And now, what Qin Chuan lacked the most was time. Now that the demon faction was in the Augu Nebula, eyeing the Iron Chain galaxy covetously, Qin Chuan could not devote himself to cultivation to check the gaps. So now he needed to take some shortcuts. Since Saint Baudelaire had taken the initiative to mention this matter, naturally it was because he had a shortcut in his hands that Qin Chuan could take. During the process of communication, Qin Chuan had already guessed this point. He looked at Saint Baudelaire with some expectation and said, "Senior, please teach me how to do it." Saint Baudelaire took a deep look at Qin Chuan and said, "This is the secret of the one God religion and should not be taught to outsiders. However, in the current situation, the consequence of being conservative is complete destruction. Therefore, after discussing with the Divine Master, I have decided to teach you this shortcut." Chapter 1288. A shortcut. A shortcut to advance to the tribulation stage. Hearing Saint Baudelaire's words, Qin Chuan's heart skipped a beat, and he asked, could it be that the Pope used this shortcut to advance to the tribulation stage? Saint Baudelaire nodded and replied, "I've been at the pinnacle of the combination realm for thousands of years, and I've never been able to perfectly fuse the power in my body into one, so I haven't triggered the immortal tribulation. When the demon faction invaded, I couldn't continue to waste time, so I could only use this shortcut to complete the fusion of the power in my body and then trigger the immortal tribulation to advance to the tribulation stage." Qin Chuan frowned slightly and asked, "Are there any repercussions to this shortcut?" In Qin Chuan's opinion, if the one God religion had long known about the existence of the shortcut and it didn't have any repercussions, then Saint Baudelaire should have advanced to the tribulation stage long ago. Saint Baudelaire had waited until there was no other way to take this shortcut, which meant that this shortcut wasn't easy to take. Saint Baudelaire shook his head and said, "This shortcut doesn't have any repercussions, but it's too dangerous. That's why I haven't tried it before." Hearing Saint Baudelaire's explanation, Qin Chuan was relieved. He wasn't afraid of the danger of this shortcut, but he was afraid of any repercussions. What is the shortcut that the Pope is talking about? Qin Chuan looked at Saint Baudelaire curiously. Is it a specific place or a method? Saint Baudelaire replied, "It's a specific place. That place is located in the dark universe in the west of the Deus cluster, in a place that has never been explored. The universe was vast and boundless, and today's major star clusters only occupied a small part of the universe. Most of the places in the universe were the dark universe that had never been thoroughly explored." When he heard Saint Baudelaire say that the shortcut was in the dark universe, Qin Chuan no longer had any doubts in his heart. If this shortcut was in the outside world, it would be very difficult to hide, and only a place like the dark universe was the most suitable place to hide some secrets. Although it's the dark universe, it's not particularly deep. If you have a map, it's very easy to find it. Saint Baudelaire said to Qin Chuan, "I'll give you the map, and you can go find that place yourself." Now that the three most powerful beings of the demon faction were at the front lines, Saint Baudelaire really could not leave and could only let Qin Chuan go alone. Saint Baudelaire believed that no one could threaten Qin Chuan without encountering the supreme existence of the tribulation stage. When Saint Baudelaire handed the map to Qin Chuan looked at it and said, "Thank you." Upon hearing this, Saint Baudelaire looked at Qin Chuan with a complicated gaze and said, I should be the one thanking you. You are the one who has preserved the fire of hope for the one God sect. Qin Chuan smiled and said, There's one more question. How long will it take for this round trip? Qin Chuan remembered that Saint Baudelaire had disappeared for a long time before returning, at least about 2 months. This depends on your specific situation. The round trip will take about 10 days. Saint Baudelaire said to Qin Chuan, At that time, I was on the carrier-class spaceship, the One, which can reach a speed of 1,200 kilometers per second. Qin Chuan thought for a moment. Although the Hope's speed could also reach the level of the One, the Hope was too big of a target. If he took the Hope to the dark universe, the possibility of being exposed was very high. Therefore, Qin Chuan could only travel with his physical body and go alone. Fortunately, Qin Chuan had the ability to travel through space, and his speed was even faster than the One. It would take about 6 or 7 days to reach the destination. I have one last question. Qin Chuan looked at Saint Baudelaire and asked, What's so special about that place? Upon hearing this, Saint Baudelaire replied, The environment there is completely different from the outside world. You will know when you get there. Hearing Saint Baudelaire's answer, Qin Chuan did not ask any more questions. When he got there, he would naturally know the answer to his question. After arranging everything in the Iron Chain Galaxy, Qin Chuan quietly left Aogu City and went to the shortcut. Before Qin Chuan returned, Chen Changxing would temporarily serve as the supreme commander of the front line. No one had any objection to Qin Chuan's arrangement. After leaving Aogu City, Qin Chuan immediately went to the Aogu Nebula. Through the Aogu Nebula, he went to the dark universe marked on the map. After almost 3 consecutive days of space travel, he finally came to the entrance of the dark universe marked on the map. Qin Chuan looked at the dark universe in front of him and rushed in without any hesitation. On the way here, Qin Chuan thought about whether Saint Baudelaire would deceive him and have other intentions. But in the face of the temptation of advancing to the transcending tribulation stage, coupled with the time they spent together, Qin Chuan decided to believe in Saint Baudelaire. After going deep into the dark universe, Qin Chuan no longer continued to travel through space, but strictly moved forward according to the map. After all, this was the dark universe, so it was better to be careful. Qin Chuan moved forward according to the map. 4 days later, he finally came to the destination marked on the map. Looking at the continent floating quietly in the universe in front of him, Qin Chuan had some doubts in his heart. This continent looked similar to the eternal forest in his impression, but there was nothing special about it. After standing in the distance and watching for a while, Qin Chuan tried to approach the continent. When Qin Chuan approached the continent, he suddenly felt that the gravity on his body had become different. The gravity of this continent is a bit strange. Qin Chuan found that the closer he got to the continent, the greater the gravity he felt. When he came to the edge of the continent, the gravity was as high as 100 times the normal gravity of the outside world. The universe was vast and full of strange things. There were also some planets with unusual gravity in the outside world, but it was the first time that Qin Chuan saw a continent with gravity as high as 100 times the outside world. When Qin Chuan set foot on the continent, his face couldn't help but change slightly. He didn't expect that 100 times the gravity was not the limit of this continent. Every time he took a step forward, the gravity would increase a little. Moreover, in addition to the gravity, Qin Chuan found that the environment of this continent was also very special. A second ago, it was still raging, and the next moment, it suddenly began to snow like goose feathers. The temperature suddenly rose, and a drought came in an instant. This strange climate change was also a very strange experience for cultivators. As he went deeper into the continent, the changes in the weather became faster and faster, making Qin Chuan feel like he couldn't resist it. This continent was really strange. Chapter 1289. Qin Chuan stood at the edge of this mysterious continent, looking ahead with an extremely solemn gaze. He had a hunch that even with his strength, he could only go about 1,000 meters into this continent before he had to stop. Because if he went any further, the extremely bad weather and strange changes were not something he could withstand with brute force. There's actually such a strange place in the universe. Even with my strength, it is difficult to go deep. After personally experiencing the uniqueness of this continent, Qin Xuan could not help but exclaim in admiration. Now, he suddenly understood why Saint Bodhidra used this continent as a shortcut to advance to the tribulation stage. In order to trigger the immortal tribulation, a perfected fusion stage cultivator first had to fuse the power in his body to a perfect degree. There were many ways to do so, but the simplest and most violent way was to train crazily. At this time, this mysterious continent was like a huge millstone in Qin Xuan's eyes, and the power in Qin Xuan's body was a handful of beans in this millstone. Now, what he had to do was to use the millstone's power to completely grind these beans, remove the impurities, and preserve the essence. This essence was the power of fusion and was the prerequisite for triggering the immortal tribulation. After figuring this out, Qin Xuan sat down about 100 meters away from the millstone continent. He silently began to circulate his energy, using the harsh weather of the millstone continent to temper himself. While Qin Xuan began to use the millstone continent to train himself, the demon faction launched another war and began to attack the Iron Chain Galaxy. Just as Tianxin expected, the demon faction focused their attacks on the 4th, 5th, and 6th defense lines. The rest of the defense lines were just feints to divert the attention of the Endless Coalition Army and their forces. In this battle, the demon faction had invested a total of 2 billion soldiers in the 4th, 5th, and 6th defense lines. It seemed to be a huge force, but they were scattered behind the 3 defense lines and did not cause much pressure to the Endless Coalition Army. However, the Endless Coalition Army did not let down their guard because this was not the first time that they had dealt with the demon faction. They were very clear that the demon faction had always liked to test the waters during their first attack and collect information. They would only truly begin their second attack. Just as everyone had expected, the demon faction's attack only lasted for 2 days before their army retreated like a receding tide. Tianxin stood at the front of the 4th line of defense. Looking at the messy battlefield and the damaged fortifications, he couldn't help but feel a little worried. In this probing attack, the frontline soldiers still felt great pressure. If they weren't sure that this was just a probing attack, they would have even mobilized the mobile troops in Aogu City to support them. Fortunately, the demon faction retreated quickly and decisively. If the demon faction had continued to attack for 3 more days, he would have had to mobilize the mobile troops in Aogu City to the front line to assist in the defense. Third, Elder Tian. Lu Zi came from the direction of the battlefield. She had previously gone to track down the demon faction's army. After confirming that the demon faction had truly retreated, she returned. When Tianxin saw Lu Zi return, he smiled and said, "Thank you for your hard work. It's my duty. It's not hard." Lu Zi looked at Tianxin and asked, "Elder Tianxin, do you think we can withstand the next attack from the demon faction?" Tianxin was silent for a moment before he replied, "To be honest, I'm not sure. The gap in military strength was really hard to make up for. If he was given another 2 billion soldiers, he wouldn't feel that he couldn't defend the Iron Chain Galaxy. However, the reinforcements were still in the process of being mobilized. It would take at least 2 months for them to arrive at the front line." Hearing Tianxin's answer, Lu Zi pursed her lips and said, "Just do your best." Before Qin Xuan left, he said that if things don't work out, then retreat to Celestial Star. If Celestial Star can't be defended, then retreat to Io Nebula. Lu Zi had always remembered Qin Xuan's words. In a war, the decisive factor was never the number of territories occupied, but the number of people. As long as there were people and people, no matter how badly they lost, there was still hope for a comeback. When Tianxin heard Lu Zi's words, he sighed and said, "I don't know when he'll be back." Although Tianxin and Qin Xuan didn't have much contact, Qin Xuan always gave Tianxin the feeling that everything was under his control. Tian Sen had to admit that having Qin Chuan at the command center made him feel at ease. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that Qin Chuan was now everyone's backbone. The endless allied army couldn't leave Qin Chuan without anyone. Before Qin Chuan left, Tian San didn't realize that the young man had unknowingly made such a huge impact on him. In fact, it wasn't just Tian San who was influenced by Qin Chuan. Those who had been in contact with Qin Chuan were more or less influenced by Qin Chuan. After all, from the beginning of the war until now, only Qin Chuan had repeatedly defeated the Demon Alliance. This was something that no one else had ever done. Tian San wanted Qin Chuan to return as soon as possible. Lu Zi also hoped that Qin Chuan could return as soon as possible. As one of Qin Chuan's most trusted people, she knew more than others. Before Qin Chuan left, he had made a copy of the map and gave it to her. If Qin Chuan didn't return within 3 months, she would follow the map to look for Qin Chuan. She wanted to see him dead or alive. Of course, this was the worst-case scenario. Lu Zi didn't want to look for Qin Chuan by herself. She wanted to see Qin Chuan return to the endless allied army as the supreme existence of the crossing calamity stage. Aogu City, a tall figure dressed in the uniform of the endless allied army's logistics soldier, walked in the logistics base without attracting much attention. He walked past the commander-in-chief's residence as if nothing had happened. He didn't stop and didn't even look at the commander-in-chief's residence. Therefore, the guards outside the commander-in-chief's residence didn't pay special attention to his existence. It's been 9 days. Qin Chuan hasn't shown up and hasn't inspected the camp. It seems that he should be no longer in the logistics base of Aogu City. So, did he return to the celestial planet? But there's no trace of Qin Chuan on the celestial planet. After the spy, disguised as a logistics soldier, left the commander-in-chief's residence, he happened to meet a staff officer from the Wind Spirit clan on the road. After passing by the staff officer, he immediately turned and followed behind the staff officer. At the same time, the logistics soldier's body emitted a faintly discernible lavender mist, slowly shrouding the staff officer. The passers-by didn't notice this scene. Chapter 1290. This was the 3rd day since Qin Chuan came to the Millstone continent. In these 3 days, Qin Chuan has been trying to hone his strength with the help of the outside world's bad weather. Although it was a bit hard, the harvest was great. In 3 days, I have fully adapted to the bad weather changes in this 100 meters area, and the power of my body has become more refined and vigorous because of this honing. If the original fusion degree of Qin Chuan's power was 80%, then now it was about 82%. Qin Chuan slowly stood up, glanced ahead, and then took a step forward. Because Qin Chuan has fully adapted to the bad weather changes in this 100 meters area, Qin Chuan did not feel much pressure at this time. When he walked about 300 meters deep, Qin Chuan stopped. Although Qin Chuan can still continue to move forward with his current endurance and strength, Qin Chuan wants to go step by step. This 300 meters deep is the most suitable place to stop for the 2nd time. Thinking of this, Qin Chuan sat cross-legged again and began to adapt to the bad weather changes in this 300 meters deep area and hone his strength. Just when Qin Chuan began the 2nd honing, a secret information was sent from Augustus to the Dongfeng Galaxy. Qin Chuan has left Augustus and went to a secret place to try to advance to the crossing calamity stage. This matter was proposed by the Pope. Before Qin Chuan left, he had a private chat with the Pope. The content of the chat is unknown. When Fedidic, who was in charge of the Dongfeng Galaxy, saw this information, his face could not help but become a little gloomy. He did not expect that Qin Chuan, who had just broken through to the peak of the unification stage not long ago, would try to advance to the crossing calamity stage now. If this kind of thing happened to someone else, maybe Fedidic would think it was whimsical, but this kind of thing happened to Qin Chuan. Fedidic had to seriously consider how sure Qin Chuan was. Qin Chuan trying to advance to the crossing calamity stage was proposed by Saint Bottle. Fedidic pondered, so Saint Bottle must have given Qin Chuan enough confidence to make Qin Chuan make this decision. But where did this confidence come from? Thinking of this, Federic suddenly remembered that not long ago, the Pope had not yet advanced to the crossing calamity stage and was still at the peak of the unification stage. But later the Pope disappeared for a period of time, and when he appeared again, he had advanced to the crossing calamity stage. Federic was sure that when Saint Baudelaire disappeared, he must have gone to some mysterious place, where he successfully crossed the immortal tribulation and advanced to the crossing tribulation stage. Now, Qin Chuan should have gone to that mysterious place under Saint Baudelaire's proposal. Federic even thought that there must be something special about that mysterious place that helped Saint Baudelaire successfully advance to the crossing calamity stage. Therefore, Saint Baudelaire recommended that mysterious place to Qin Chuan. According to the time, Saint Baudelaire had disappeared for nearly 2 months. Qin Chuan was now at the peak of the unification stage and had not yet broken through to the peak of the unification stage. Therefore, even if Qin Chuan was talented and intelligent, he should need no less than a month. Since Qin Chuan disappeared until now, 10 days had passed, leaving him only about 20 days. If he could not find Qin Chuan in these 20 days, perhaps when he saw Qin Chuan again, he would have to face a Qin Chuan who had advanced to the crossing calamity stage. Although all this was just a guess, it had succeeded in making Federic's mood extremely bad. No, I have to find Qin Chuan as soon as possible. If there was anyone in this universe who did not want to see Qin Chuan advance to the crossing calamity stage, it must be Federic. Now, Qin Chuan was only at the peak of the unification stage, but he was already so difficult to deal with. How powerful would Qin Chuan be when he advanced to the crossing calamity stage? Recalling the information about Qin Chuan that he had read, Federic felt a chill in his heart. Once Qin Chuan successfully advanced to the crossing calamity stage, they would not have a good life. The Pope is not the only one who knows about this mysterious place. There should be records of it in the One God sect. Thinking of this, Federic no longer hesitated and immediately set off for the only continent. He wanted to go to the only cathedral to find information and interrogate the captured higher-ups of the One God sect. As for attacking the Iron Chain Galaxy, it did not matter now. To Federic, nothing was more important than killing Qin Chuan. After Federic left the East Wind Galaxy, Furu and Guru immediately received the news. They immediately contacted Federic, wanted to ask him why he suddenly left the front line. Federic had no intention of hiding this, because he was worried that Qin Chuan would advance to the crossing calamity stage earlier than he expected. Therefore, he had to rely on Furu and Guru's power to deal with Qin Chuan. In Federic's opinion, no matter how powerful Qin Chuan was, facing the three of them at the same time would only lead to a dead end. When they heard Federic talk about the information and some speculations about Qin Chuan's advancement to the crossing calamity stage, Furu and Guru's expressions changed. Their thoughts were surprisingly the same as Federic's. Qin Chuan, who was only at the peak of the combination realm, was already so difficult to deal with. After Qin Chuan advanced to the crossing calamity stage, they would have to be careful when facing Qin Chuan alone. Although they did not want to admit this, they knew very well that Qin Chuan was definitely not a person who could be measured by common sense. When facing Qin Chuan, no matter how careful they were, it would not be too much. At this time, Guru even began to regret why they did not execute the decapitation tactic on Qin Chuan earlier. If they had killed Qin Chuan earlier, they would not have to be so anxious now. Therefore, in order to find Qin Chuan as soon as possible, Federic, Furu, and Guru exhausted all means and began to investigate the whereabouts of Saint Baudelaire during his 2 months of disappearance. Everyone in the One God religion was a devout believer of the one true God, atheists. They would not betray Saint Baudelaire or Qin Chuan, but Federic did not think of using conventional means to interrogate them. He directly extracted the memories of many of the higher-ups of the One God religion using incomparably cruel means. Federic learned from the memories of a red-cloaked archbishop who led the exploration of the dark universe that 400 years ago, The exploration team of the One God religion had discovered an extremely mysterious continent in the dark universe. Later on, all information about that continent was destroyed. Before Saint Badidaru disappeared, he had found the red-cloaked archbishop and asked him about some things about this mysterious continent. At this time, 20 days had passed since Qin Chuan's mysterious disappearance. Chapter 1291. Fedidic was certain that Qin Chuan's mysterious disappearance was definitely due to him going to this mysterious continent in the dark universe. He had already found the route to this mysterious continent from the Archcardinal's memories. With his speed, he would only need about 5 days to reach there. In next to no time, Fidek told Furo and Guru about the information he'd found. Furo and Guru immediately decided to head to that mysterious continent with Fidek, and they had to seize this opportunity to kill Qin Chuan. By the time Fedidic and the other two began to move, Qin Chuan was already 3,000 meters deep into the continent. The energy fusion in his body had already reached 93%. When the energy fusion in his body reached 100%, Qin Chuan would meet the conditions to trigger the immortal tribulation. Once Qin Chuan met the conditions to trigger the immortal tribulation, Qin Chuan would have an extremely high chance of transcending the immortal tribulation with his advantage of controlling the law of lightning. It's already 3,000 meters deep. Next time, it might be 5,000 meters or even deeper. Qin Chuan slowly got up. Looking at the constantly changing weather in front of him, he got up and continued forward. At that moment, Qin Chuan, who was focused on searching for the energy fusion, did not know that Feditic, Furo, and Guru were already on their way to the Millstone continent. They would arrive in 4 or 5 days. At the border between the Dark Universe and the Deus Cluster, Feditic waited for half a day before Furo and Guru finally arrived. Feditic glanced at Furo and Guru and said, "When we see Qin Chuan, there's no need to say any more nonsense. Just kill him." Hearing Fedidic's words, Furo sneered and said, "I've already let him escape from me once. I won't allow such humiliation to happen a second time. That's why I'll attack with all my strength the moment I see him. There's no need for you to remind me." Fedidic felt relieved when he heard Furo's words. He was also someone who had suffered at the hands of Qin Chuan, so he was especially vigilant. He was afraid that Furo or Guru would choose to capture Qin Chuan alive in order to torture Qin Chuan, giving Qin Chuan a chance to turn the tables. Now that Furo had made it clear that he wanted to kill Qin Chuan, there was no need for him to ask Guru for his opinion. The three of them only chatted briefly before entering the Dark Universe under Fidek's lead. To others, the Dark Universe might be an extremely mysterious and dangerous unknown region. However, to Fidek and the other two who were supreme existences at the transcending tribulation stage, although the Dark Universe was mysterious, it was not necessarily dangerous. Under Fedidic's lead, the three of them only took 3 days to find the Millstone continent. The moment they saw the Millstone continent, Guru couldn't help but reveal a shocked expression and said, "I've been to many places, but this is the first time I've seen such a strange continent. Not only is the gravity different from the outside world, but the weather is also very bad and changes extremely quickly." Furo frowned slightly and said, "Is this really the place we're looking for? Why would Qin Chuan come here? I didn't see any spaceships, nor did I sense Qin Chuan's aura. This continent is a bit strange. Perhaps Qin Chuan has already entered, so we can't sense Qin Chuan's aura." Feditic glanced at the Millstone continent and said to everyone, "What do you think this continent can do for advancing to the tribulation passing stage?" Feditic was a second-grade martial warrior from the Void Empire. Although his strength was equivalent to his supreme existence at the tribulation passing stage, the two were fundamentally different. Therefore, Feditic didn't really understand the conditions needed to advance from the peak of the Unity stage to the Tribulation Passing stage. Hearing Fedidic's question, Furo only pondered for a moment before answering. Perhaps Qin is using the special environment of this continent to temper himself and promote the fusion of the energy in his body. Gulu nodded and said, I've also thought of that. Qin just broke through to the pinnacle of the body integration stage not long ago. It might be simple for him to break through to the pinnacle of the body integration stage in a short period of time, but it won't be easy for him to fuse the power in his body into one in a short period of time. The uniqueness of this continent might be able to help him temper his strength and act as a catalyst. Hearing Furo and Guru's words, Fedidic frowned and said, since that's the case, Qin must be on this continent. However, the environment of this continent is really strange. It can actually isolate our perception. How are we going to find Qin? Speaking up to here, Fedidic suggested, why don't we directly destroy this continent? No. Furo and Guru rejected Fedidic's suggestion almost at the same time. This continent might not be of any use to Fedidic, but it was a rare treasure land for them. In the future, all the overlords at the peak of Unity stage could come here to temper themselves. Even if only 1 out of 10 overlords at the peak of the Unity stage could successfully pass the Immortal Tribulation and advance to the Tribulation Passing stage, it would still be a great thing. Fedidic could naturally think of what Furo and Guru could think of. However, it was precisely because of this that he proposed to destroy this continent. The appearance of more Tribulation Passing stage supreme existences in the demon race and Zerg wasn't a good thing for their Void Empire. Since you don't agree to destroy this continent, why don't the two of you enter this continent to find Qin? Fedidic coldly snorted and said, I'll be in charge of providing support. Furo and Guru looked at each other after hearing Fedidic's words and chose to agree, although they might encounter some accidents in the process of finding Qin. In order to protect this continent that could give birth to supreme existences at the Tribulation Passing stage, it wasn't a big deal to take some risks. All right, we'll do as you say. Furo glanced at the Millstone continent and said to Guru, the two of us, one left and one right. Guru nodded and then flew to the left, while Furo went to the right. When Fedidic saw that Furo and Guru had already entered the Millstone continent, a trace of coldness gradually appeared on his expressionless face. Since Furo and Guru valued the Millstone continent so much, how could Fedidic let them have their way? After leaving the Dark Universe and returning to the outside world, he would pass the map to Narway and have Narway come and destroy this place. As for whether or not Furo and Guru would find out afterwards, that wasn't within Fedidic's consideration. The continent was already destroyed. Could it be that Furo and Guru would fall out with him over a piece of trash? Even if they fell out now, it would be better than waiting for the demon race and Zerg to use the Millstone continent to give birth to supreme existences at the Tribulation Passing stage. Chapter 1292. When Furo and Guru got closer to the Millstone continent, they realized that the closer they got to the depths of the Millstone continent, the faster and fiercer the weather would change. The gravity would also increase. This discovery made them very surprised. Although they didn't know how the one god religion discovered this continent would belong to the demon race and Zerg in the future. As long as this continent existed, the demon race and Zerg's perfect unity overlords could save at least 90% of the time on their way to the Tribulation Transcendent stage. The once biggest problem of how to combine the powers was no longer a problem. Now, only the Tribulation Transcendent stage was placed here. This is really a good place. Furo smiled. Although this kind of environment can no longer affect the Tribulation Transcendent stage overlords too much, it's an excellent place for a perfect unity overlord. It's really not bad. As Furo advanced towards the depths of the continent, he was thinking about who he should send to this continent to train. In the current universe, although the unity overlords were still powerful, they were still too weak compared to the Tribulation Transcendent stage overlords. If 3 more Tribulation Transcendent stage overlords appeared in the demon race, Furo was confident that he could turn this universe into the demon race's backyard. Furo's thoughts were almost exactly the same as Guru's. At this moment, Guru was also thinking that when he returned, he must quickly select a perfect unity overlord from his race to come here to train and try to advance to the Tribulation Transcendent stage. Once there were enough Tribulation Transcendent stage overlords, Zerg's domination of the universe would be just around the corner. At this moment, Furu and Guru were both thinking about the glory of their race's future. It was as if they had already forgotten that their original intention of coming here was to kill Qin Chuan. However, before we realize the demon race's great wish of dominating the universe, we should first crush this stinking bug that tarnishes this sacred land. Furu smiled coldly. His speed suddenly increased by a lot. He wanted to find Qin Chuan and then kill Qin Chuan. At this moment, Qin Chuan still didn't know that Furu and Guru were looking for him everywhere. He was already 8,000 meters deep into the Millstone continent. He was being attacked by the wind, the sun, the wind, the snow, and the rain. The fusion has reached 98%. Only 2% left. Qin Chuan's eyes were filled with anticipation as he looked ahead. As long as he left this place and went deeper into the continent, he would undergo another round of tempering. Then, the energy in his body would completely fuse into one, and he would meet the conditions to trigger the immortal tribulation. Now, he was only 2 steps away from the crossing calamity stage. Now, he was going to take the second last step. Just as Qin Chuan was thinking about this, a figure suddenly appeared within his range of perception. When he sensed the existence of this figure, Qin Chuan could not help but be shocked. Frio, why is he here? Qin Chuan's face was full of bewilderment. Although he was only 2 steps away from advancing to the crossing calamity stage, these 2 steps were like a natural moat between him and Furo. If Furo discovered his existence, he was afraid that he would be in danger. Furo's mental strength is not as strong as mine, so he has not discovered me for the time being. I have to open up the distance between us as soon as possible. Just as Qin Chuan was about to head in the opposite direction to avoid Furo, Guru's figure appeared within his range of perception. This caused Qin Chuan's expression to become extremely unsightly. Both Furo and Guru had appeared here. This was definitely not an accident. Furthermore, Fidetic might also be here, facing 2 or even 3 supreme existences at the crossing calamity stage. Qin Chuan's chances of escaping alive were almost 0. Thinking of this, Qin Chuan immediately made a decision and headed deeper into the continent. Now, the only way he could save himself was to complete the last round of tempering as soon as possible, then trigger the immortal tribulation and advance to the crossing calamity stage. Whoosh! Qin Chuan's speed was very fast. At this time, he could no longer care about a step-by-step plan. He wanted to complete the last 2% of tempering as soon as possible. When Qin Chuan began to head deeper into the continent, Furo and Guru felt a trace of strangeness at almost the same time. Someone was spying on them. The moment this feeling appeared in their hearts, Furo and Guru subconsciously thought of Qin Chuan. However, within their range of perception, there was still no trace of Qin Chuan. Strange. Could it be that Qin Chuan's mental strength is stronger than ours? Furo frowned. His mental strength was at the peak of the core condensation stage. However, even if Qin Chuan's mental strength was at the peak of the core condensation stage, he should have been able to detect it. Could it be that there is an even higher mental strength realm above the core condensation stage? But even if there is, how did Qin Chuan advance to such a realm? Furo was bewildered. He suspected that this was a sign that Qin Chuan had advanced to the crossing calamity stage. He had to find Qin Chuan as soon as possible. When he thought of this, Furo also increased his speed. At this time, Qin Chuan was already 12,000 meters deep. This was already the limit of what Qin Chuan could endure at this time. This is it. Qin Chuan did not hesitate. He immediately sat cross-legged on the ground and began to temper himself. However, he had a feeling that the more anxious he was, the slower the tempering speed seemed to be. There was clearly only 2% left, but he was still unable to complete it. Qin Chuan used continuous deep breaths to adjust his state of mind. When his state of mind gradually stabilized, the tempering speed also increased. This also made Qin Chuan realize that this tempering was not only tempering the power in his body, but also tempering his state of mind. It was also at this time that Qin Chuan's figure finally appeared within Furo's range of perception. "I finally found you." Furo was overjoyed. He originally wanted to directly kill Qin Chuan. However, under the influence of the terrible weather and strange gravity of the Millstone continent, he could only vaguely sense Qin Chuan's existence. He was unable to specifically lock onto Qin Chuan. If he wanted to completely lock onto Qin Chuan, he had to get closer. Although Furo could also directly attack with all his strength and completely destroy the area where Qin Chuan was, the Millstone continent had already become the holy land of the demon race in Furo's heart. He was worried that if he directly attacked with all his strength, it would negatively affect the Millstone continent. Therefore, he decided to approach Qin Chuan as quickly as possible. He would only attack when he was absolutely certain that he would not destroy the Millstone continent. At this time, Furo was approaching Qin Chuan at an extremely fast speed. Qin Chuan had already noticed this, but he was currently in a critical period of tempering and could not be interrupted. Buzz! The 10,000 Demon Seal and Cyclic Sky Seal slowly flew out of Qin Chuan's body and headed straight for Furo. At the same time, the little armored dragon also twisted its round body and charged towards Guru, who was rushing over. Chapter 1293. To Qin Chuan, what he needed the most was time. Whether it was the Flipping Sky Seal, the 10,000 Goblin Seal, or the Little Armor Dragon, their mission now was to buy time for Qin Chuan, even if it was only for a minute. When Furo saw the Flipping Sky Seal and the 10,000 Goblin Seal, he couldn't help but reveal a look of disdain. "You actually want to use these two divine artifacts to buy time? You are underestimating me." The 10,000 Goblin Seal was a supreme divine artifact, but the Flipping Sky Seal was only a middle divine artifact due to its spirituality being damaged. If the Flipping Sky Seal was still a supreme divine artifact, perhaps these two seals could cause some trouble for Furo. Unfortunately, the Flipping Sky Seal hadn't recovered yet. Just as Furo was about to destroy the 10,000 Goblin Seal and the Flipping Sky Seal, he saw the 10,000 Goblin Seal and the Flipping Sky Seal fiercely colliding with each other. They rapidly melted and merged into one. "What is this?" Furo was extremely shocked. This was the first time he had seen such a special thing. Two divine artifacts had actually merged by themselves. When the 10,000 Goblin Seal and the Flipping Sky Seal merged, the new seal that was born suddenly exploded with an extremely powerful aura. It rushed in all directions and actually caused the adverse weather changes within a radius of 1,000 meters to slow down. Buzz! On the new seal, the words heaven and demon slowly appeared. They turned into the golden shadow of a person and the shadow of an enormous dragon, which attacked Fu brazenly. This time, the cold smile on Furo's face had already disappeared. He had become solemn. Just the combination of the 10,000 Goblin Seal and the Flipping Sky Seal might not cause any trouble for Furo. However, when the two seals merged into a new Heaven Goblin Seal, its power was definitely not as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. The current Heaven Goblin Seal could be said to be infinitely close to a divine artifact. If the Flipping Sky Seal's spirituality had not been damaged, perhaps the Heaven Goblin Seal would have directly transformed into a divine artifact. However, even if it was infinitely close to a divine artifact, it was enough to give Furo a headache for a while. Duong! The colossal dragon's shadow ruthlessly crashed into Furo. Furo raised his hand and punched out, blocking the colossal dragon's attack. On the other side, the colossal dragon's shadow held a long sword and accurately pierced it towards Furo's chest, filled with killing intent. Whoosh! Fu Ao opened his mouth, and a pitch-black palm-sized blade flew out, clashing with the figure. This blade was called Ghost Mist, and it was a life-bound magic treasure that Fu Ao had refined when he was still a nobody. Now, It had grown into a top-grade Saint artifact. Ding ding dong dong. The illusory figure fought fiercely with the ghostly fog, and it temporarily had no time to attack Furl. Furl took this opportunity to punch the illusory dragon again, wanting to shatter the illusory dragon. However, the illusory dragon's resistance exceeded Furl's expectations. His powerful strength actually failed to shatter the illusory dragon. Damn you! Earlier, Fu didn't use his full strength because he didn't want to cause damage to the Millstone continent. But now, he couldn't endure it any longer. The immortal energy in his body surged and poured into his right fist. When he punched out once more, the enormous dragon phantom suddenly exploded with a wail and shattered with a bang. Without Qinchuan's control, even the heavenly demon seal that was infinitely close to a divine weapon could not withstand the powerful immortal energy. After dealing with the giant dragon shadow, Fu Ao attacked again, directly crushing the figure's shadow. The destruction of the giant dragon shadow and the figure's shadow greatly reduced the 10,000 demon seal's spirituality, and it was unable to fight again. Fu Ao was not in the mood to care about the 10,000 demon seal for the time being. He went straight for Qinchuan. On the other side, Guru sensed the battle fluctuations not far away. He originally thought that he could find Qinchuan first, but he didn't expect that the little armor dragon would suddenly appear and block his path. King of Sacred Armor? Guru looked at the little armor dragon that suddenly appeared and couldn't help but be stunned. How could there be a king of sacred armor in such a place? The little armored dragon's existence had always been a secret, and only a few people knew about it. Obviously, Guru didn't belong to those few people. It was also because of this that when he saw the little armored dragon, Guru was stunned. Don't go over. The little armored dragon opened its arms and blocked in front of Guru, not allowing Guru to get close to Qinchuan. Guru was even more shocked now. He actually encountered a king of sacred armor that could speak. This king of sacred armor can actually speak. It seems that it and Qinchuan are together. Guru felt a little dizzy. The king of sacred armor had always been Zerg's exclusive sacred beast. How could it fall into the hands of a human? Moreover, it seemed to have evolved to an extremely high level of intelligence. One had to know that even the king of sacred armor in the hands of the king of sacred armor was only slightly larger in size. Although Guru didn't know how Qinchuan obtained the little armored dragon, it didn't affect his desire for the little armored dragon. If he could subdue the little armored dragon, his strength would be greatly improved. Thinking of this, Guru immediately opened his mouth and chanted a string of strange incantations. These incantations turned into a white chain in the air and wrapped around the little armored dragon. However, the white chain had only just approached the little armored dragon when it was bitten by the little armored dragon. Crack! When he saw the little armored dragon bite the white chain and swallow it into its stomach, Guru's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. What the hell is this? The little armored dragon swallowed the broken white chain into its stomach, then raised its hand and patted its round belly. It said to Guru, again, looking at the little armored dragon's look of wanting to eat him dry, Guru's expression could be said to be extremely interesting. At this time, he could already see that it was not easy to subdue the little armored dragon in a short period of time with his methods. Therefore, he should first kill Qinchuan and wait until the little armored dragon became ownerless before thinking of a way to subdue it. Thinking of this, Guru raised his hand and waved at the little armored dragon, wanting to chase it aside. However, the little armored dragon did not move at all and stood straight in front of him. Seeing this scene, Guru frowned slightly and said in a deep voice, "Get lost." As he spoke, Guru punched out and immortal energy gushed out. He wanted to use immortal energy to directly repel the little armored dragon. However, what shocked Guru was that when the little armored dragon faced the immortal energy attack, it actually opened its mouth and swallowed the immortal energy into its stomach. Burp! The little armored dragon let out a burp, grinned, and said cheerfully, "Delicious! What the hell is this thing? I've never heard of a king of sacred armor that could devour immortal power." Guru was truly a little frightened by the little armored dragon. The supreme existence of the Tribulation Transcendent stage could crush cultivators of lower realms by relying on their incomparably powerful immortal energy. But now, immortal energy was useless against the little armored dragon. Just as Guru was thinking of this, he suddenly saw the little armored dragon's face reveal a hint of pain. Then, the little armored dragon opened its mouth and spat out a small amount of immortal power. Chapter 1294. When he saw the little armored dragon spit out some of the immortal power it had swallowed, Guru instantly understood. Although the little armored dragon could swallow immortal power, there was a limit. "I see. Your stomach is not a bottomless pit." After discovering that the little armored dragon had a limit to its devouring, Guru was relieved. He raised his hand and sent another wave of immortal energy at the little armored dragon. This time, the little armored dragon had a bitter expression. It really couldn't eat anymore. Bang! The immortal power pushed the little armored dragon back. Guru took the opportunity to rush toward Chinchuan. Chinchuan could clearly see everything that was happening around him through his powerful spiritual power. He saw the 10,000 demon seal and the cyclic sky seal giving up the chance to transform into divine artifacts and fusing into the heavenly demon seal in order to block Furo. He saw the little armored dragon desperately swallowing immortal power in order to block Guru. He saw the damaged heavenly demon seal chasing after Furo with all its might. It kept attacking just to delay Furo for a little bit more time. He also saw the little armored dragon fiercely biting Guru's shoulder. No matter how Guru attacked, it would not let go. Whether it was the heavenly demon seal or the little armored dragon, in order to protect him and give him enough time to complete the final training, they used all methods. Chinchuan, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground, slowly opened his eyes. He looked at the heavenly demon seal behind Furo and the little armored dragon that Guru had forcefully pulled off his shoulder and thrown out. He revealed a gentle expression and said softly, "You have done enough. Leave the rest to me." Rumble. Dark and heavy tribulation clouds converged above Millstone Continent, and they blotted out the sky and blotted out the sun, causing the adverse weather changes to practically instantly stop and disperse. Furo and Guru stopped advancing when they were only 1,000 meters away from Chinchuan. Chinchuan had already triggered the immortal tribulation. They had no way to kill Chinchuan now. If they rashly approached Chinchuan, they would even become the target of the immortal tribulation. We were still one step too late. Fu's expression was extremely gloomy. If it wasn't for the heavenly demon seal, he would definitely be able to kill Chinchuan before Chinchuan triggered the immortal tribulation. At this time, Guru's face was also extremely ugly. He did not expect that Chinchuan had actually reached this step and triggered the immortal tribulation. From this, it could be seen how magical this continent was. At this time, Fadertic, who was guarding outside, also noticed the tribulation clouds condensing above the Millstone Continent. The thing he was most worried about had happened. Chinchuan had triggered the immortal tribulation. Feedtech quickly arrived beside Furo and Guru. With a gloomy face, he asked, "What's wrong with you two?" Facing Fidertic's question, Frio coldly snorted and said, "Do you think we want to see him trigger the immortal tribulation? We were all stopped, that's all." With the power of the heavenly demon seal, even Feedtech would be delayed for at least 3 to 5 minutes. He was only delayed for 3 to 5 minutes before Chinchuan triggered the immortal tribulation. There was nothing he could do. Let's not blame each other now. Let's think about how to deal with Chinchuan later. Guru looked at Chinchuan with a somewhat fearful expression. Once Chinchuan successfully advanced to the crossing calamity stage and controlled the heavenly demon seal with the help of the little armored dragon, even if the three of them wanted to deal with Chinchuan, it would take some effort. Moreover, these were not Chinchuan's trump cards. What really made Guru feel fearful was Qinchuan's space and time laws. No one knew how terrifying Qinchuan's attainments in the space and time laws would become after he advanced to the crossing calamity stage. I hope he could be struck to death by the immortal tribulation. Frio looked at the tribulation clouds above Qinchuan's head and coldly snorted. It would be best if Qinchuan died under the immortal tribulation. However, Frio also knew that all of this was just his wishful thinking. Qinchuan controlled the lightning laws, so the probability of him dying under the immortal tribulation was extremely small. Rumble. Within the tribulation clouds, the rumbling of thunder shook the heavens and earth. Lightning dragons rolled and roared, and the pressure was astonishing. Feed Tech and the other two had no choice but to retreat from the Millstone continent and give Qinchuan space. At this moment, Qinchuan was not in the mood to pay attention to Feed Tech and the other two for the time being. He focused all of his attention on the tribulation clouds in the sky. Looking at the tribulation clouds that almost covered the entire Millstone continent, Qinchuan's expression could not help but become somewhat excited. As long as he survived this immortal tribulation, he would be able to advance to the tribulation passing stage. At that time, he would no longer have to fear Feed Tech and the other two. When I was crossing the minor tribulation of the perfected form combination realm, the pressure of the lightning tribulation compared to the immortal tribulation I'm facing now is like heaven and earth. There is no comparison at all. To Qinchuan, crossing a minor tribulation was very easy. However, facing the immortal tribulation, even if Qinchuan controlled the lightning laws, he still did not dare to be careless. When the lightning energy within the tribulation clouds gradually gathered into a ball, the immortal tribulation finally descended. Different from what Qinchuan had imagined, the immortal tribulation was not like the lightning tribulation from before, which struck down from the tribulation clouds. Instead, it condensed into a ball of white lightning about 1 meter in diameter and shot out like a cannonball. The moment this ball of immortal tribulation approached Qinchuan, it suddenly exploded. The white lightning instantly turned the space within a radius of 10,000 miles around Qinchuan into a white world. The sound of thunder roaring was earth-shattering, and the entire continent was trembling. When the immortal tribulation force entered Qinchuan's body, Qinchuan felt the power in his body like a barrel of explosives, and the immortal tribulation force was the fuse that ignited the power in his body and violently attacked his body from the inside out. The extreme destructive power made Qinchuan unable to bear it, and he cried out in pain. When the excruciating pain was over, it was followed by a comfortable feeling that made people feel as if they were floating in the air. Qinchuan's body, which had suffered a huge impact, began to recover at this time. In the blink of an eye, he recovered, and Qinchuan's aura was also 30% stronger than before. Qinchuan knew in his heart that only by enduring the power riot caused by the immortal tribulation force could he usher in the sweet rain after the riot. If he could not endure it, he would die. However, this was just the beginning. According to Qinchuan's inference, there should be 8 more immortal tribulations waiting for him after this. When the second immortal tribulation, about 2 meters in diameter, shot toward Qinchuan like a cannonball, Qinchuan tried to weaken the destructive power of the immortal tribulation with the lightning law. However, to Qinchuan's surprise, the lightning law's weakening of the destructive power of the immortal tribulation was extremely weak. It only weakened it by about 3%. Rumble. The lightning exploded, and the immortal tribulation force once again triggered a riot of power in Qinchuan's body. It swept through Qinchuan's body like a storm, and everywhere it passed, it was a mess. Chapter 1295. In the distance, Fidect and the other two were watching Qinchuan's tribulation with uncertain expressions. As a member of the Void race, Fidect wouldn't experience tribulation when he was advancing. Thus, he had only heard of the might of the immortal tribulation. It was his first time seeing it with his own eyes. He couldn't help but feel curious as he looked at the huge white ball of lightning condensing above the tribulation cloud. Is the might of the immortal tribulation triggered by everyone so astonishing? Hearing Fidek's words, Furio and Guru's expressions changed slightly. Neither of them answered Fidek's question. From Furio and Guru's silence, Fidek realized something and immediately asked, "What was the situation when you were undergoing tribulation?" Facing Fidek's question, Furio's expression was somewhat unsightly. He was silent for a while before answering. "When I was undergoing tribulation, the ball of lightning condensed was only the size of a soccer ball." Hearing Furio's answer, Fidek couldn't help but stare blankly. He was quite familiar with soccer, which was a relatively popular sport in the universe. Even the first ball of lightning condensed by Qinchuan's tribulation had a diameter of about 1 meter, while Furio's was only the size of a soccer ball. The difference was a bit too great. On the other side, Guru clenched his teeth and said, "Mine was also the size of a soccer ball." Hearing this, Fidek immediately realized that perhaps Furio and Guru's situation was normal, but Qinchuan's was abnormal. It is said that the greater a person's potential, the bigger the ball of lightning condensed when triggering tribulation. Guru's gaze was extremely gloomy as he looked at the tribulation cloud in the distance and said in a deep voice, "Qinchuan's ball of lightning is so huge. Its potential is at least 10 times greater than ours." Furio's tone was extremely gloomy as he said, "In other words, Qinchuan has a higher chance of becoming an ultimate existence than us." Hearing Furio's words, Fidek's expression suddenly changed. Although he knew long ago that Qinchuan was a person who couldn't be measured by common sense, the potential that Qinchuan was currently displaying still shocked him. How terrifying was someone who had a high chance of becoming an ultimate existence? He must die. Fidek made the decision without hesitation. As soon as the immortal tribulation ended, they would immediately attack and kill Qinchuan. In fact, even without Fidek's reminder, Furio and Guru had the same thought. If they couldn't kill Qinchuan now, they would never have such an opportunity in the future. As time passed, Qinchuan had already passed 5 immortal tribulations. After each immortal tribulation, the power of the new immortal tribulation would multiply. The diameter of the thunderball had increased from the initial 1 meter to the current 10 meters. At this moment, above the tribulation clouds, the 6th tribulation had already condensed. The diameter of the lightning ball was no less than 15 meters. Even with the strength of Fidek and the others, the terrifying pressure caused their hearts to palpitate. If they were the ones facing the 6th immortal tribulation, even if they didn't die, they would be severely injured. This is already the 6th immortal tribulation. It seems that this is not his limit. Furio said in a deep voice, "In the past, I heard that Qinchuan's immortal tribulations were all 9 heavenly tribulations. Could it be that this immortal tribulation also has 9 immortal tribulations?" All along, Furio had been known as the person with the most talent under the Demon King. However, he only had 6 immortal tribulations. Even the Demon King only had 7 immortal tribulations. It's not just the Thunder Tribulation. Qinchuan's immortal tribulations also have 9 immortal tribulations. If he's old enough to trigger the heavenly tribulation, I'm sure the heavenly tribulation will also have 9 immortal tribulations. Guru's gaze was extremely cold as he looked at the tribulation clouds in the distance. The more outstanding and powerful Qinchuan's performance was, the more he couldn't allow Qinchuan to continue living. When the 6th immortal tribulation shot toward Qinchuan, as expected, the tribulation clouds began to condense the 7th immortal tribulation. Qinchuan's aura also began to increase. It actually made Furio feel that Qinchuan's aura was already on par with his. After Qinchuan completely passed the immortal tribulation, his aura would probably be far more powerful than his. When he thought of this, Furio actually felt a trace of retreating. He was actually a little scared. When Furio realized that a trace of reverence had appeared in his heart for Qinchuan, his face quickly turned ashen. He wasn't willing to admit all of this. Just as Furio was struggling in his heart, Guru suddenly transmitted his voice to Furio and said in a low voice, "Furio, Qin Chuan is probably not easy to deal with." When he heard Guru's transmission, Furio coldly replied, "I know." Of course, Furio knew that Qin Chuan wasn't easy to deal with. If Qin Chuan was easy to deal with, he wouldn't have lived until now. He also wouldn't have made the three of them attach so much importance to him and come together. Furio even felt a trace of retreating in his heart. If we can kill Qin Chuan, we'll go all out. If we can't, we'll leave Frederick behind to stop Qin Chuan. After muttering to himself for a moment, Guru told Furio his plan. Although the three of them were in an alliance, if they were to talk about closeness, Zerg and the demon race were clearly closer. No matter what, Frederick belonged to another universe. It was easier for them to accept betraying him. When he heard Guru's words, Furio asked, "You think that even if the three of us join hands, we won't be Qin Chuan's match?" When he said this, Furio discovered that he didn't feel much surprise in his heart. It turned out that, unknowingly, he had tacitly agreed to this matter. It was just that he found it hard to accept for a moment. "I only have this guess. Everything will only be known after Qin Chuan crosses the immortal tribulation and fights with him." Guru secretly glanced at Frederick, then said to Furio, "As far as I know, another second-rank expert has already arrived in the Void Empire. However, Frederick didn't tell us about this matter. Instead, he chose to hide it." When he heard this, Furio's expression changed slightly. He said in a deep voice, "I understand. We'll do as you say." While Furio and Guru were communicating, Qin Chuan had already crossed the 7th immortal tribulation. At this moment, he had already ushered in the 8th immortal tribulation. As the immortal tribulation became stronger and stronger, Qin Chuan's aura also became stronger and stronger. Now, it wasn't just Furio who felt reverence for Qin Chuan. Even Guru and Frederick were trembling with fear. After Qin Chuan crosses the immortal tribulation, his strength might immediately surpass theirs. "Brothers, we might only have one chance to make a move." Frederick looked at the 9th immortal tribulation gathering in the tribulation clouds and said in a deep voice, "When the tribulation clouds dissipate, the three of us will go all out. We must not hold back. If we can't kill Qin Chuan with this attack, I'm afraid our situation will be very dangerous." Chapter 1296. When Furio and Guru heard Frederick's words, they felt extremely conflicted. Before coming here, they never thought that they would actually face such a dilemma. If they left now, they wouldn't encounter any danger, but they would miss out on a chance to kill Qin Chuan. But if they didn't leave and continued to wait for Qin Chuan to pass the immortal tribulation, then they wouldn't be able to kill Qin Chuan immediately. Instead, they would have to face Qin Chuan's counterattack. No one knew how terrifying Qin Chuan's counterattack would be. To be honest, before coming here, I never thought that there would actually be so many changes in our thinking. Furio sighed. At first, they thought that as long as they were serious, killing Qin Chuan would only be a matter of waving their hands. But now, they felt that even if the three of them joined forces and attacked with all their strength, they might not be able to kill Qin Chuan. This change was huge, and at the same time, it also made their hearts heavy and conflicted. There's no point in saying this now. We'd better make our preparations. Guru quietly hinted to Furio. He and Furio had already made a decision. After attacking with all their strength, regardless of whether Qin Chuan was dead or alive, they would immediately flee far away without any hesitation. As for what Frederick would do, that wasn't within their scope of consideration. Rumble. After nearly an hour, Qin Chuan's immortal tribulation finally reached its final critical moment. The 9th lightning ball, with a diameter of 100 meters, had already condensed. This last immortal tribulation gathered all the power in the tribulation clouds. Its might was so great that even a supreme existence of the tribulation stage might not be able to withstand it. Seeing how terrifying the might of the last immortal tribulation was, Frederick and the other two couldn't help but placed their hopes of killing Qin Chuan on this ninth immortal tribulation. If Qin Chuan died under the immortal tribulation, they would be too happy. Qin Chuan raised his head to look at the ninth immortal tribulation in the sky. He watched as the huge lightning ball slowly rotated. The dark tribulation clouds also rotated along with it, like a black whirlwind, setting off a vast momentum. Wong, the last immortal tribulation, finally moved. Like a cannonball, it shot towards Qin Chuan. Although it didn't seem to be very fast, the pressure it emitted made Fidect and the other two who were watching from afar feel suffocated. As for Qin Chuan, who was facing the immortal tribulation, his expression was incomparably solemn. Life or death, it all depended on this moment. When the thunderball fell from the sky and pressed down on Qin Chuan's body, it was as if his body had been struck by a giant hammer. He was pressed into the ground by a powerful force. The solid ground cracked, and dense cracks spread out in all directions like a spiderweb. Qin Chuan's body was on the verge of collapse. The extreme pain caused Qin Chuan's expression to become incomparably ferocious and his veins to bulge. A white light suddenly invaded the entire world, causing the dark universe to suddenly turn into a snow-white world. Endless lightning flew in all directions like snowflakes. The extreme destructive power turned everything it touched into nothingness. In order to avoid the fluctuations caused by the explosion of the immortal tribulation, the three of them had already retreated hundreds of thousands of miles away. They looked at the snow-white world of lightning in front of them and felt a great impact on their hearts. With such power, if they were in the center of the explosion, they would have been smashed into pieces. Is he still alive? Furo's voice was a little hoarse, and his expression was extremely complicated. If Qin Chuan could survive such a powerful immortal tribulation and advance to the tribulation passing stage, then they might as well turn around and run for their lives. Whether it was Fidect or Guru, they had no way of answering Furo's question because they didn't know whether Qin Chuan was still alive or not. If he was still alive, then Qin Chuan could be considered to have passed the immortal tribulation and successfully advanced to the tribulation passing stage. When the white lightning gradually dissipated, the universe returned to its dark state. The Millstone continent reappeared in front of Fidect and the other two, but it was already on the verge of collapse. In the sky above the Millstone continent, a tall figure stood proudly. At this moment, Qin Chuan had successfully passed the immortal tribulation and officially advanced to the tribulation passing stage, becoming the supreme existence in this universe. Qin Chuan closed his eyes and silently felt the changes in the power in his body. The abundant immortal power caused Qin Chuan's confidence to soar rapidly, giving him a feeling of invincibility. This is immortal power. Is this the strength of supreme existences in the tribulation passing stage? Qin Chuan murmured in a low voice. He slowly opened his eyes and looked at Fidect and the other two in the distance. Now, he wanted to use these three to test how strong he was. While Qin Chuan was thinking about this, Fidect and the other two had already launched their strongest attack on Qin Chuan according to their original plan. Furo opened his mouth and spat out a ball of pitch-black fog, which quickly enveloped Qin Chuan. This pitch-black fog was formed by all the immortal power in Furo's body, and it was Furo's killing move. Guru suddenly turned into a huge white beetle. His 6 pairs of eyes all looked at Qin Chuan and shot out rays of white light, which gathered in the air and turned into a ball of white light. Everywhere it passed, space was torn apart. Fidect condensed all the void power in his body and turned it into a dark purple, diamond-like crystal the size of a thumb. He shot it at Qin Chuan like a bullet. It looked ordinary, but it hid a great terror. Facing the all-out attack of Fidect and the other two, Qin Chuan's expression was normal. He didn't even have any intention of dodging or defending. When the attack of Fidect and the other two was only 1,000 meters away from Qin Chuan slowly raised his hand and pointed his index finger in front of him. Freeze! Qin Chuan casually spat out the word freeze and the black fog, white ball of light, and dark purple crystal that were flying over stopped in unison. Countercurrent. When Qin Xuan said the word countercurrent, again, the black fog, white ball of light, and dark purple crystal suddenly smiled and turned into the purest immortal power. Qin Xuan gently waved his hand, and the three masses of immortal power dispersed. In the distance, when Fidek saw this scene, his expression couldn't help but become incomparably frightened. He had thought about how Qin Xuan would block their attack, but he never thought that Qin Xuan would be so relaxed, even somewhat careless. How can he be so strong? Fidek couldn't believe it. But at this moment, no one could answer his question, because Furo and Guru had already turned around and fled. Chapter 1297. When Fidertic sensed that Furu and Guru had already turned around and fled, his expression quickly turned ashen. He roared, "Bastards!" He never thought that Furu and Guru would actually flee so decisively. The key point was that they didn't even tell him. Wasn't this treating him as cannon fodder? Do you still have the demeanor of supreme experts at the tribulation passing stage? Facing Fidertic's roar, Furu and Guru acted as if they didn't hear it. Their escape speed didn't slow down at all. If they could only choose between survival and the demeanor of an expert, they would definitely choose survival. What was the use of demeanor when they were already dead? In the distance, Qin Xuan looked at the scene in front of him and couldn't help but reveal a playful expression. In the past, whether it was facing Fidertic or Furu, all he could do was cover his head and flee like a rat. Even blocking the opponent's attack depended on luck. But now, it was the other party who had to cover their heads and flee like a rat when facing him. This change in status made Qin Xuan's mood very complicated. But no matter how complicated his mood was, he had to kill these people first and then slowly experience it. At this time, Fidertic was already preparing to flee, but Qin Xuan didn't intend to give Fidertic this opportunity. Qin Xuan raised his hand, and the heavenly devil seal appeared in his hand. A wave of immortal power surged out from Qin Xuan's body and entered the heavenly devil seal. Almost instantly, the heavenly devil seal's spirituality was restored to normal. After the heavenly devil seal's spirituality was restored, Qin Xuan raised his hand and smashed the heavenly devil seal toward Fidertic. Suppress. Under Qin Xuan's control, the heavenly devil seal suddenly turned into the size of a planet and fell from the sky, smashing toward Fidertic. Fidertic sensed the pressure from the heavenly devil seal above his head, and his expression suddenly changed. With a low shout, his body suddenly turned into a dark purple mist and quickly flew out of the heavenly devil seal's range of suppression. Seeing that the light purple mist was about to escape from the heavenly devil seal's range of suppression, a transparent wall suddenly appeared in front of him. No matter how hard the light purple mist tried, it couldn't break through the transparent wall. The light purple mist once again turned into Fidertic's appearance. He roared and bombarded the transparent wall in front of him with void power, but the transparent wall didn't move. Don't struggle. Unless your attainments in the law of space are greater than mine, you can forget about breaking through this seal. Qin Xuan's SS appeared in the distance. He calmly looked at Fidertic's as if he was a dead man's SS. Fidertic suddenly turned around and looked at Qin Xuan. His expression was extremely vigilant, and he was ready to counterattack. Qin Xuan saw this and smiled slightly. I heard that the warriors of the Void Empire are very strong in close combat. I'll give you a chance now. Defeat me in close combat, and I'll let you go. Hearing Qin Xuan's words, Fidertic didn't even ask if it was true. He directly pounced on Qin Xuan because there was only one path in front of him, and that was to defeat Qin Xuan. If he couldn't defeat Qin Xuan, he could only wait for death. As a Grade 2 warrior, close combat had always been Fidertic's specialty. If Qin Xuan kept attacking him from a distance, he could only struggle in despair. But now that Qin Xuan wanted to fight him in close combat, he saw the hope of defeating Qin Xuan. You will pay a painful price for your confidence. Fidertic closed in on Qinchuan. He raised his hand and punched. It was a simple punch, but it contained enough power to destroy heaven and earth. Bang! Fidertic's extremely fast punch was blocked by Qinchuan's hand. Qinchuan's arm only trembled slightly, and he looked very relaxed. Seeing this scene, Fidertic's expression changed slightly. The void energy lingering around his body suddenly turned into a dark purple battle armor. When Fidertic punched again, the power was several times stronger than before. Previously, when Fidertic and Saint Badaru were fighting, Qinchuan had seen Fidertic's battle armor. When Fidertic punched again, Qinchuan's face showed a touch of disappointment. He originally thought that the battle armor could increase Fidertic's strength by a lot, but he didn't expect that it would only increase his strength by about 4 times. This time, Qinchuan didn't continue to block by himself. Instead, he also punched. When Qinchuan punched, fine golden dragon scales suddenly appeared on his right arm, exuding a mighty dragon's might. Duong. When Qinchuan and Fidertic's fists collided, an extremely astonishing power rushed towards Qinchuan. The fine dragon scales on Qinchuan's right arm trembled slightly, dispersing the power. On the other hand, when Fidertic faced Qinchuan's punch, cracks appeared on his right arm's battle armor. The cracks became bigger and bigger, and even spread to his whole body. Kacha! The battle armor that Fidertic was so proud of, created with the power of the void, actually shattered under the might of Qinchuan's punch. Fidertic couldn't believe it. He thought that he would lose to Qinchuan, but he didn't expect that he couldn't even take a single punch from Qinchuan. Although I'm in human form now, the power I erupt with is the power of a dragon. You're not my opponent at all. Qinchuan looked at Fidertic with a subtle gaze and said indifferently, "The battle ends here. Goodbye." Hearing Qinchuan's words, Fidertic subconsciously wanted to struggle. He no longer held back and displayed his full strength. "Void!" Fidertic roared, and his body shattered. Deep purple blood gushed out from Fideric's shattered body, and under the influence of the power of the void, he turned into a bloody humanoid monster. Seeing this scene, Qinchuan couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly. When he fought with Arson in Tron Nebula, Arson had also turned into a similar appearance in a desperate situation and called himself a blood spirit. However, compared to Arson at that time, the blood spirit that Fidertic turned into was much more powerful. Whoosh! Fidertic, who had turned into a blood spirit, flickered and appeared behind Qinchuan in an instant. His bloody palm turned into a sharp thorn and accurately pierced towards Qinchuan's back. Roar! Suddenly, Qinchuan's figure disappeared, and a 1,000-meter-long golden dragon appeared in the universe. Fidertic's fatal attack pierced the dragon scales on the dragon's body. Although it left a deep mark on the dragon scales, it failed to pierce through the dragon scales. Just as Fidertic wanted to continue attacking, Qinchuan, who had turned into a golden dragon, no longer gave Fidertic a chance. He opened his mouth and spat out a blazing golden dragon breath that instantly enveloped Fidertic. Chapter 1298. Under the burning of the golden dragon's breath, Fidertic let out an ear-piercing scream. Qinchuan returned to his human form. He looked indifferently at Fidertic, who was burned by the raging flames and pierced by the golden lightning. There was no pity in his eyes. Fidertic deserved all of this. "Qinchuan, you are not invincible. If not for those 2 idiots escaping, you would not have been our match." At this moment, the void energy protecting Fideric's body was becoming thinner and thinner. He knew that he did not have long to live, but he also knew that he did not lose to Qinchuan, but to Furu and Guru, his 2 pig-like teammates. Qinchuan seemed powerful, but in reality, he was not powerful enough to kill them. If Furu and Guru had not escaped, the 3 of them would have had at least a 60% chance of winning if they had joined forces to fight Qinchuan. However, Furu and Guru had escaped. Therefore, Fideric's heart was filled with hatred and despair. When Qinchuan heard Fideric's roar, he smiled and said, "You are right, But unfortunately, there are no ifs in this world. As Qin Chuan finished speaking, the void energy protecting Fidek's body finally collapsed. When the dragon's breath invaded Fidek's blood-spirit body, Fidek's aura quickly withered and then completely dissipated. The commander of the Void Empire's expeditionary army, Fidek, had fallen. In the distance, Furu and Guru did not know the extent of the battle between Qin Chuan and Fidek. They wanted to know the progress of the battle, but they did not dare to stop. Qin Chuan has not caught up after so long. Furu looked at Guru and said, "Could it be that Fidek blocked him?" Guru's expression was somewhat gloomy. He did not answer Furu's question because he was thinking about a problem. He seemed to have made a wrong decision. Seeing that Guru did not speak, Furu's expression changed slightly. Could it be that Qin Chuan is not as strong as we thought? Was he just bluffing? Hearing Furu's words, Guru said in a deep voice, "He only raised his hand and stopped the attacks of the three of us at the same time, turning them into useless efforts. How could this be a bluff?" Fu frowned and said, "Maybe he only has one chance." Guru sneered and said, "Then you can go back and kill him now. Don't you want to kill him? The opportunity is right in front of you." Hearing Guru's words, Fro finally stopped talking. Even though he knew that Qin Chuan was just bluffing and was just a paper tiger that could be broken with a single poke, he could not turn back. Wong. Right at this moment, a spatial door opened up at a spot that was only 25,000 kilometers away from Furo and Guru. Qin Chuan's figure flashed out from within it, and then he entered another spatial door. When he appeared again, he was only 500 kilometers behind Furo and Guru. The moment Qin Chuan's figure appeared, Furu and Guru's expressions changed abruptly. Qin Chuan had actually caught up so quickly. Did this not mean that Fidek was already dead? Just as Furu and Guru were thinking about this, Qin Chuan's voice came from behind them. It was indifferent and emotionless. "Stop. You can't run away." Hearing Qin Chuan's words, Furu and Guru looked at each other and saw the fear in each other's eyes. However, they were not afraid of Qin Chuan, but each other. "Let's split up and run." "We can't split up. We'll be defeated one by one." Guru suggested that they split up and run away, but Furu did not think so. If they split up, Qin Chuan might only be able to chase after one of them. The other might have a chance of escaping, but it was more likely that they would be defeated one by Qin Chuan. If they did not split up and were forced into a corner, they could still try to join forces to fight back. They might be able to defeat Qin Chuan. Guru was a little hesitant. What Furu said was very reasonable, but whether it was Fidek or Furu, they had both attacked Qin Chuan before. If they split up and ran away, Qin Chuan would most likely chase after Furu first. Guru only needed to find a place to hide, and he might be able to escape Qin Chuan's pursuit. However, Guru's idea was very good. He had forgotten that in this universe, the one Qin Chuan hated the most would always be Zerg. Just as Furu and Guru were weighing the pros and cons, a realm portal suddenly appeared in front of them. Qin Chuan slowly walked out from it and said to the two of them, "Have you thought it through? Are you going to split up or join forces?" Looking at Qin Chuan, who suddenly appeared in front of them and blocked their way, Furu and Guru almost subconsciously chose to split up and run away. Looking at this scene, Qin Chuan could not help but reveal a cold smile on his face. These so-called three leaders of the demon faction had never thought of working together in the face of danger. Such a so-called alliance was like a handful of sand that would collapse on its own sooner or later. As the commander-in-chief of the Endless Allied Army, Qin Chuan had the obligation to eliminate the enemies for the Endless Allied Army. However, on the way to eliminating the enemies, it was also reasonable to eliminate the people he hated along the way. Therefore, Qin Chuan locked onto Guru as his first target. When Guru saw Qin Chuan turn around and chase after him, his expression could be said to be extremely gloomy. If he had expected something like this to happen, he would have run away with Furu. That way, they could have looked after each other. But it was a little too late to say all this now. It was absolutely impossible for him to expect Furu to turn around and help him. Why me? Before the battle began, Guru wanted to ask Qin Chuan why he did not chase after Furu, whom he had met once before, but chose him instead. Hearing this, Qin Chuan glanced at Guru indifferently and said, "Because I hate Zerg." Hearing Qin Chuan's words, Guru suddenly recalled that Qin Chuan was a human who had walked out of the banished land. He was a human who had been persecuted by Zerg many times. It was no wonder that Qin Chuan would choose him as his primary target. However, if Qin Chuan thought that he could kill him as long as he caught up to him, then he was underestimating him too much. Zerg storm. Guru roared angrily. Fine white dots of light suddenly appeared in the universe. And each of these hundreds of millions of tiny dots of light was a beetle. When these beetles gathered together, they turned into a white storm that swept towards Qin Chuan. Guru did not expect this Zerg storm to be able to repel Qin Chuan. He only needed the Zerg storm to buy him enough time. However, facing the Zerg storm, Qin Chuan had no intention of attacking. He was prepared to give a Zerg storm to Little Armor Dragon and let have a good meal. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.